A 14-year-old girl walks alone through freezing rain toward a table full of outlaw bikers, and none of them flinch. But when she slides a school photograph across the scarred wood and points at a face half hidden in the background, one man's hands begin to shake. Because former corrections officer Elias Crow knows exactly who that man is, and he knows that man is supposed to be locked in a cage 3 states away. The girl says 5 words that will tear this town apart. He's not a teacher. What happens next will test everything these men swore to protect, and expose every adult who chose silence over a child's life. Stay with me until the very end of this one, because the truth Mara Holloway carried alone is darker than anything you're ready for. If this story hits you, drop a like, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's ride. The diner sat crooked on a strip of county road that nobody used anymore unless they were lost or running from something. Gravel lot. 2 gas pumps that hadn't worked since the previous decade, a neon sign missing half its letters so it just read "Eat" in a sick orange glow against the afternoon sky that had gone the color of old concrete. Wind came off the flats carrying the smell of frozen dirt and diesel, and the temperature had been dropping since noon. Inside, the air was warm and stale. Coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. Bacon grease. The faint chemical sweetness of the vinyl booth seats cracking along their seams. A waitress named Darlene, who had stopped making conversation with strangers about 15 years ago, moved between tables with a pot in each hand, regular and decaf, and she didn't ask which one you wanted. She just poured. 7 motorcycles sat outside in a line, Harleys, every one of them, road-worn, salt-streaked, engines still ticking as they cooled. The bikes belonged to the Iron Revenant's MC, and the men who rode them were spread across 2 booths and a pulled-up chair, still wearing their leather cuts, still carrying the particular silence that comes after 4 hours on frozen highway, for a charity ride that raised $1,100 for a veterans shelter that would probably close by spring anyway. Cole Maddox sat at the end of the first booth, closest to the door. Habit. He was 53 years old, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of something harder than bone and then left in the weather. Gray at the temples, a scar along his jawline from a piece of shrapnel he never talked about. He was the president of the Iron Revenants, not because he wanted the title, but because nobody else could carry it without breaking. He drank his coffee black and he watched the parking lot through the window, the way a man watches a tree line when he's been trained to expect what comes out of it. Beside him, Elias Crow sat with both hands wrapped around his mug, like he was trying to pull warmth through the ceramic into his knuckles. Elias was 47, lean, dark circles permanent beneath his eyes. He had been a corrections officer for 9 years at a state facility downstate before something happened that put him on the other side of a resignation letter and a bottle that took him 3 years to put down. He wore his cut like the other men wore theirs. Not like a costume, but like a second skin that had grown over wounds that wouldn't close any other way. He didn't talk much. When he did, people listened, because his voice carried the particular weight of a man who had seen what people do to each other in small rooms with locked doors. The other 5, Whistler, a mechanic from Bowling Green who lost 2 fingers to an IED in Fallujah. Dutch, who rode sweep and never took off his sunglasses even indoors. Tommy Raines, the youngest at 31, who still flinched at backfires. Big Phil, the sergeant-at-arms, who could bench 350 and cried every year on his daughter's birthday because he hadn't seen her in 6. And Roach, the road captain, who kept every map in his head and hadn't slept more than 4 hours straight since his second tour. They ate their food and didn't say much because the ride had been long and the cold had gotten into their bones, the way cold does when you stop being young enough to shake it off. Darlene refilled Cole's mug without asking. He nodded. That was the extent of the interaction. Then the door opened. The girl came in alone. No car in the lot behind her, no parent trailing 10 steps back checking a phone. Just a kid. 14, maybe. Hard to tell because she was small for her age, and the oversized hoodie she wore swallowed her frame like it was trying to hide her from the world. The hoodie was gray, damp from the rain that had started 10 minutes ago. Her sneakers were wet, the cheap kind that soaked through in seconds, and she left small wet prints on the linoleum as she walked. She didn't look at the menu board. She didn't look at Darlene. She looked directly at the table full of bikers, and she walked straight toward them with the kind of deliberate pace that had nothing to do with courage and everything to do with having run out of options. Big Phil saw her first, His hand stopped halfway to his mouth, fork suspended. Dutch lowered his sunglasses a quarter inch. Tommy straightened in his seat. The change in the air was immediate. Not aggressive, not defensive, but alert. The way animals become alert when something enters the clearing that doesn't belong. Cole set down his mug. The girl stopped at the edge of the table. Her hands were shaking. She was trying to hide it by keeping them inside the hoodie's front pocket, but the fabric trembled and gave her away. Her face was pale. Not sick pale. Scared pale. The kind of white that settles under the skin when the body has been running on adrenaline for too long, and the adrenaline is almost gone. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a photograph. Standard school picture, the kind taken every fall against a blue backdrop with bad lighting that made every kid look vaguely ill. She set it on the table in front of Elias Crow. Not Cole. Not the nearest man. She placed it specifically, deliberately, in front of Elias. Then she pointed at the background, at a figure standing near a doorway, half out of frame. A man in a collared shirt with a lanyard, caught mid-step, face turned just enough toward the camera to be identifiable if you knew what you were looking for. "He's not a teacher," she said. Her voice was steady, barely above a whisper, but steady, like she had practiced saying it, like she had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times, standing in front of a mirror in whatever bathroom she could lock the door of, mouthing the words until they stopped feeling impossible. The table went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of men resting, a different quiet, the kind that fills a room when something cracks open that can't be closed again. Elias looked at the photograph. He didn't pick it up. He stared at it the way a man stares at a car wreck on the highway, unable to look away, unable to process what he was seeing, his brain running through every possible explanation and rejecting them one by one until only the truth remained. His hands tightened around the coffee mug. His knuckles went white. "Where did you get this?" he said. "School picture day, October." The girl's jaw tightened. "He's been there since September. He does maintenance. Everyone calls him Mr. Ray." Elias closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them, something had changed behind them. Something old and dark and furious that he had spent years trying to bury under sobriety and silence and the simple rhythm of riding with men who didn't ask questions about the past. "His name isn't Ray," Elias said quietly. Cole looked at Elias. He didn't ask the question out loud. He didn't have to. They had ridden together long enough that the question traveled in the silence between them, a frequency only men who have bled together can hear. Elias met his president's eyes. "I processed him 7 years ago, downstate, 2 counts, minors." He paused. The muscle in his jaw worked. "He got 18 years. He shouldn't be out. He shouldn't be anywhere near a school." The girl, Mara, though none of them knew her name yet, stood perfectly still. She didn't cry. She didn't fidget. She watched Elias with an expression that was too old for her face, an expression that said she had already tried every door she could find, and every single one had been locked. "Nobody believes me," she said, not with self-pity, with the flat, exhausted certainty of someone stating a geographical fact. "The sky is gray. The ground is cold. Nobody believes me." Cole leaned forward. His voice was low, controlled, the way you speak to someone standing on a ledge. Not because you think they'll jump, but because you know the wind up there is loud, and you need to cut through it. "Sit down," he said. "Start from the beginning." Mara sat. Darlene appeared with a glass of water without being asked. Even Darlene, who hadn't made conversation in 15 years, recognized what was happening at that table. She set the water down and walked away and didn't come back. Mara Holloway was a foster child. She said it the way you'd say you were left-handed, not as a complaint, just as a fact that shaped everything else. She had been in the system since she was 9. 3 placements. The current one was a couple named the Burdens. She said the name without irony, though Tommy Raines caught it and something flickered across his face. Who lived in a subdivision on the east side of Ridgemont, a town of 12,000 people that had been slowly dying since the mill closed 8 years ago. The Burdens were fine. They fed her. They didn't hit her. They also didn't listen to her, because listening required effort, and effort required caring, and caring required seeing her as a person instead of a monthly check from the state. She had noticed the maintenance man in September. New guy, friendly, too friendly. The kind of friendly that made her skin crawl the way a dog's hackles rise before the thunder. Instinct older than language, older than reason. She watched him. She noticed the way he positioned himself near the younger kids during lunch. She noticed the way he volunteered for after-school cleanup near the elementary wing. She noticed the way he smiled. She told her foster mother. Her foster mother told her she was imagining things, and to stop causing problems, or there would be consequences. She told her school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Pratt, who wore inspirational quote pins on her lanyard and kept a jar of candy on her desk. Mrs. Pratt wrote something in a file and told Mara that making accusations was serious and that she should think carefully about the difference between feelings and facts. She told her caseworker during a scheduled visit. The caseworker sighed, made a note, and moved on to the next item on the checklist. 3 adults, 3 doors, 3 locks. So Mara started doing what nobody else would do. She watched, she documented, she drew. In a composition notebook she kept hidden inside her pillowcase, she sketched the maintenance man's routines, his schedules, the vehicles he used, the license plates she could read from the second-floor bathroom window. She mapped the hallways. She marked the blind spots in the security cameras. She noted dates, times, which kids he talked to, how long, whether anyone else was present. She was 14 years old, and she was building a case because every adult in her life had decided it was easier to call her a liar than to face the possibility that a monster was walking freely through a building full of children. Elias listened to all of this without moving. His coffee went cold. His face was stone. But his eyes were burning, and the men who knew him could see it, and they knew what that fire meant because they had each carried their own version of it. The fury that comes not from being wronged yourself, but from watching someone small and defenseless be ground down by the machinery of indifference. When Mara finished talking, the silence lasted almost a full minute. Then Cole spoke. "What's his name, the one the school knows him by?" "Raymond Garris." Elias shook his head slowly. "Raymond Garris doesn't exist. His real name is Dale Sutter. The ID he's using is fabricated. I'd bet my life on it." "Can you prove it?" Cole asked. "I processed the man for 9 months. I know his face better than I know my own brother's." Elias's voice was flat, controlled, but something underneath it was vibrating like a wire pulled too tight. "He had a tattoo on his left wrist, small, looked like a compass rose. Ask her." They both looked at Mara. She nodded. "He wears a watch over it, but I saw it once when he was carrying boxes. Left wrist. Looks like a star with points." The air in the diner changed again, heavier, darker, like the barometric pressure before a storm drops so fast your ears pop. Cole looked around the table. Every man was watching him, waiting. Not because they needed permission, because they needed direction. These weren't men who operated on impulse. They were men who had learned, through blood and failure and the particular education of violence, that impulse gets people killed. You plan, you move together, you protect the objective. "We take her back," Cole said. "Then we find out what we're dealing with." Nobody argued. Nobody asked what would happen after. They already knew. The rain was coming down harder when they left the diner. Mara rode behind Tommy Raines because Tommy was the smallest, and his bike had the most room, and because, without anyone saying it, they all understood that the youngest member of the Brotherhood should be the one carrying the youngest person they were trying to protect. Tommy handed her his spare helmet without a word. She put it on. It was too big. She held on to the back of his cut with both hands, and she didn't say anything when the engine roared to life because she had already said everything she needed to say. The clubhouse was a converted auto garage on an industrial stretch outside Ridgemont. Concrete block walls. A rusted bay door that still worked if you kicked it right. Inside, it smelled like motor oil and old wood and the ghosts of 1,000 cigarettes. There was a bar made from a repurposed workbench, mismatched chairs, a pool table with a torn felt surface. On the wall behind the bar, a row of photographs. Members past and present, some of them dead, all of them remembered. No flags, no slogans, just faces. They brought Mara inside, and Big Phil made her a grilled cheese sandwich because Big Phil always made food when he didn't know what else to do. And the sandwich was perfect because Big Phil did everything with his hands perfectly. even though those hands had done things in Kandahar that he would never talk about. While Mara ate, Elias sat at the far end of the bar with Cole and spread the school photograph flat under a hanging shop light. The man in the background, half-turned, lanyard, collared shirt. The face was older, 7 years older, and the hair was different, shorter, darker, probably dyed. But the jawline was the same. The set of the shoulders was the same. The way he stood with his weight slightly forward, like a man ready to move quickly, was the same. "That's Dale Sutter," Elias said. "I spent 9 months watching him through reinforced glass. I wrote his incident reports. I escorted him to medical when he faked seizures to get moved to a softer ward." He paused. "He was smart. Smarter than most of them. Patient. The kind of patient that makes your skin crawl because you know he's not reforming, he's just waiting." Cole studied the photograph. "How does a man with 18 years walk free after 7? Overcrowding, good behavior, administrative transfers that lose paperwork between facilities. It happens more than people want to know." Elias's voice carried the bitterness of someone who had watched the system from the inside and understood exactly how many cracks ran through its foundation. He could have been released, reclassified, moved to a halfway house that lost track of him, or he walked off a work detail and nobody bothered reporting it because the budget for fugitive recovery got cut 3 years in a row. So he's either legal and slipped through registration, or he's a ghost. Either way, he's in a school. That sentence sat between them like a loaded weapon on the bar top. Roach came over with the laptop that was older than some of the men in the room. He had already been searching. "Raymond Garris has a work history going back 2 years. Maintenance and janitorial. 3 different school districts across 2 states before Ridgemont. References check out on paper, but the phone numbers loop back to the same 2 voices. Shell references," Cole said. "Built his own backstory, took his time doing it." Roach turned the laptop so they could see. "He's careful. Never stays more than 1 school year. Moves in summer, changes districts. Stays in rural areas, small towns, places where background check systems run on 5-year-old software and 1 underpaid clerk." Dutch, who had been listening from the pool table, spoke for the first time. "We going to the school?" Cole looked at Elias. Elias looked at the photograph. At the face of a man he had watched through reinforced glass for 9 months. A man who had smiled at him once through the food slot and said something that Elias had never repeated to anyone and never would. "We go to the school," Elias said. They went in the morning. Cole and Elias, no cuts, no bikes. Cole drove his truck. They wore clean shirts. They looked like concerned community members because that's what they needed to look like, and because Cole understood that the world judged you by your surface before it ever bothered to learn your depth. Ridgemont Middle School was a flat brick building that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never met a child. Institutional lighting, hallways the color of old teeth, the kind of building where hope went to fill out paperwork and die quietly in a fluorescent-lit office. They asked to see the principal, a woman named Dr. Sandra Weeks. She kept them waiting 22 minutes in plastic chairs outside her office, which was a power move that Cole recognized and filed away without reaction. When they were finally shown in, Dr. Weeks sat behind a desk covered in neat stacks of paper and a framed degree from a university nobody had heard of, and she smiled the way people smile when they have already decided not to help you. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you?" Cole let Elias talk. Elias laid it out clean. The photograph. The identification. Dale Sutter's criminal history. The observation that a registered or unregistered predator was currently employed as a maintenance worker with unsupervised access to children in her building. Dr. Weeks listened. Her smile didn't waver. When Elias finished, she folded her hands on the desk. "Mr. Crow, I appreciate your concern, but Raymond Garris passed a full background check through our district's Human Resources Department. He has references, a clean work history, and excellent reviews from his supervisors. I'm not in a position to terminate an employee based on the personal suspicion of, forgive me, a private citizen with no official standing. I'm telling you I processed this man in a state correctional facility," Elias said. His voice was controlled, but the edges were starting to fray. 2 counts of predatory conduct with minors. He is using a false identity. And I'm telling you that our hiring process follows all state and federal guidelines. Dr. Weeks' smile tightened. If you have evidence, real evidence, not personal recollection, I suggest you contact law enforcement. In the meantime, I would advise you to be very careful about making accusations that could constitute defamation. She let that word hang. Defamation. A threat wrapped in a suggestion, wrapped in a smile. Cole spoke for the first time. A 14-year-old girl came to us because every adult she told treated her the way you're treating us right now. The smile vanished. Dr. Weeks' eyes went hard. If you're referring to Mara Holloway, I am aware of her history of making unfounded claims. She is a troubled young woman with documented behavioral issues. I would caution you against taking the word of a child with that kind of background over the professional judgment of trained educators. Cole stared at her. He didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice, but something in his expression made Dr. Weeks shift slightly in her chair, a movement so small it was almost invisible, the instinctive recoil of someone who has just realized that the person across from them is not afraid of anything in this room. "We're done here," Cole said. He stood up. Elias followed. At the door, Cole turned back. "When this breaks open, and it will, remember this conversation. Remember that you chose the comfortable answer." They walked out of the building into pale winter sunlight. Elias was shaking, not with fear, with the kind of rage that lives in the marrow, the kind you can't burn off or drink away or outrun on an open highway. The rage of a man who has just watched the system do exactly what it always does: protect itself. "She's not going to do anything," Elias said. "No. And if we go to local police, they'll call the school. The school will say we're making trouble, and Sutter, whoever he is, he'll know someone's looking. Yes. And he'll run. Or worse." Cole opened the truck door. "He'll stay, and he'll accelerate whatever he's planning because he thinks the clock just started." They sat in the truck. The engine idled. The heater blew stale air. "We need to find out if he's on any registry," Cole said. "State or federal. If he's not, if he fell through the cracks or built this identity clean enough to pass, then we build it ourselves. Roach, Dutch, whatever it takes." "And the girl?" "She stays at the clubhouse until we know what we're dealing with. Whistler's got the spare room above the garage." Elias nodded. Then he said something quietly, almost to himself. "She built surveillance files at 14, drew maps of his movements, noted license plates, escape routes." He stared through the windshield at the school building. "That's not paranoia. That's survival training. She's done this before." Cole looked at him. "Not this specific thing," Elias said, "but something, somewhere. She learned to watch and document because at some point in her life, watching and documenting was the only thing between her and whatever was coming." The weight of that sentence filled the cab of the truck like exhaust. They drove back to the clubhouse in silence. That evening, rain hammered the metal roof so hard, conversation required raised voices. Mara sat on a stool at the bar eating a second grilled cheese. Big Phil had added tomato this time, which for Big Phil was practically a declaration of affection, and sketching in a new notebook that Whistler had bought at the gas station on the corner. She drew with the focused intensity of someone who had learned that putting things on paper made them smaller, more manageable, less likely to swallow you whole in the dark. Elias sat 3 stools down. He watched her draw without watching her draw. The peripheral awareness of a man trained in observation. He noticed things. The way she kept her back to the wall. The way she tracked every person who moved through the room. The way she held the pencil. Tight, too tight. The grip of someone who was always ready to use whatever was in their hand as a weapon if they needed to. He recognized all of it, every single tell, because he had seen it 1,000 times in the faces of people behind reinforced glass, not the predators, the survivors. "Hey," he said. She looked up, guarded, waiting. "The drawings, in your notebook, the one you kept at your foster home." He paused, choosing his words. "How long were you watching him?" "Since the second week of school." "That's almost 3 months. Oh, 71 days. The specificity hit him like a fist. "Not about 3 months. Not since September. 71 days. She had counted every single one. "You've done this before," he said. Not a question. Mara's hand stopped moving on the page. She looked at him, and in that look, in the flatness of it, the absolute absence of surprise, Elias saw the answer before she gave it. "Second foster home," she said. "I was 11. She went back to drawing. Elias sat with that. He sat with it the way you sit with a broken bone before the adrenaline wears off and the real pain begins. An 11-year-old girl learning to map the movements of people who meant to harm her because no adult in her world could be trusted to do it. Building her own early warning system out of pencils and paper because the systems designed to protect her had already failed. He got up. He walked to the back of the clubhouse where Cole was on the phone with Roach, who was running records from the county library's public computer terminal because the clubhouse Wi-Fi was too slow and too traceable. Cole held up a hand. Listened. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. The way eyes change when the news confirms the thing you were afraid of. He hung up. Roach pulled county employment records. Raymond Garris's social security number traces back to a man who died in a nursing home in Arkansas 4 years ago. The identity is stolen, so he's definitely not who he says he is. No, and there's more. Cole lowered his voice. Roach cross-referenced the previous school districts where Garris worked. 2 of them had incidents, complaints filed by students, then withdrawn. In both cases, the families moved away within weeks of filing. Elias felt the floor tilt beneath him. Not literally, but the sensation was the same, the sickening lurch of understanding that the thing you're dealing with is bigger and uglier and more practiced than you thought. "He's been doing this for years," Elias said, "and he's been getting away with it because nobody connects the dots between districts." They stood in the dim hallway between the main room and the storage bay. The rain on the roof was a constant roar. From the bar they could hear the faint scratch of Mara's pencil on paper. "We can't wait," Elias said. "If he knows someone's asking questions, if that principal tells him 2 men came in with a photograph—" "She won't," Cole said. "It would mean admitting she was warned. She'll bury it." "And if she doesn't?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Then we just made the most dangerous play in the book. We showed our hand to someone who's spent years learning how to disappear." The rain didn't stop. The night got colder. Mara fell asleep on the old couch in the common room with the notebook still open on her chest, pencil loosely gripped in her fingers. Big Phil covered her with a wool blanket that smelled like motor oil and campfire smoke and stood there for a moment, looking down at her, and the expression on his face was the one he only wore when he thought about his daughter, the one that contained every failure and every hope and every mile of distance that he couldn't close. Elias sat at the bar alone. He turned the school photograph over and over in his hands, the face in the background, the half-turn, the lanyard, the smile he couldn't see but could remember. 7 years ago, through the food slot, Dale Sutter had looked at him and said, "You know the best part about what I am, officer? There's always another town." Elias had buried that sentence for 7 years. Now it was back, and it had an address. At 6:47 the next morning, Tommy Raines pulled into the school parking lot on his bike and cut the engine. He sat there in the cold watching the building from across the lot, hands in his jacket pockets, looking like any other guy killing time. He watched the staff arrive. He watched the buses pull in. He watched the kids file through the front doors. At 7:12, a white utility van pulled into the maintenance lot behind the building. A man got out, collared shirt, lanyard, work boots. He moved with an easy, practiced normalcy that would have fooled anyone who wasn't looking for it. But Tommy was looking. And when the man reached for the building's side door, his jacket sleeve pulled back just enough to reveal his left wrist. A tattoo. Small, faded. A compass rose. Tommy didn't move. He didn't call anyone. He took one photo with his phone, checked it, and rode away. 20 minutes later at the clubhouse, he set the phone on the bar in front of Cole and Elias. "It's him," Elias said. "It's him," Tommy confirmed. Cole stared at the photo. Then he looked up at both of them. "Call everyone in. Church, 1 hour." The word went out. By 9 a.m., every member of the Iron Revenants was seated around the scarred wooden table in the back room. The door was closed. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old radiator and the distant sound of Mara's pencil on paper from the common room where Whistler was keeping her company. Cole stood at the head of the table. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. "This is what we know," he said, and he told them everything. When he finished, nobody spoke for a long time. Then Dutch took off his sunglasses, something he almost never did, and the eyes underneath were wet. "What are we going to do about it?" Dutch asked. Cole looked around the table, at every face, at every man, at every scar, and every shadow, and every broken piece that had been reassembled into something that still rode, still fought, still showed up. "We're going to do what we always do," he said. "We're going to stand between the ones who can't fight and the ones who won't stop." The vote was unanimous. Every hand, every voice. But before the first engine could turn over, Whistler burst through the door, his face white, his breathing ragged. "She's gone," he said. "Mara's gone. Back door, her shoes, her hoodie, gone. But she left the notebook." Elias was on his feet before the sentence finished. "She left it open," Whistler said. "To a page. You need to see it." They followed him to the common room. The blanket was folded on the couch. The notebook lay open on the cushion. The page showed a hand-drawn map, detailed, precise, labeled in a child's careful handwriting. A building, a route, a schedule, and at the bottom, in block letters that pressed so hard into the paper, the pencil had nearly torn through, "He has another one. Building 4, tonight." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. She hadn't run away. She had gone to finish what no adult would start, and she had a 6-hour head start. The clubhouse erupted. Not with shouting. These weren't men who shouted when it mattered. It erupted with movement, with the scrape of chair legs on concrete, with the particular kinetic violence of trained bodies shifting from stillness to purpose in the space of a single breath. Elias was already at the back door, his hand on the frame, staring at the gravel lot behind the building as if the force of his gaze could pull Mara's footprints back into existence. Rain. Cold. The gravel was a mess of tire tracks and boot prints and puddles reflecting a sky the color of spent ammunition. No direction. No trail. A 14-year-old girl in wet sneakers and an oversized hoodie had walked out of this door and into a town that had already proven 3 times over that it would not protect her. "How long?" Cole's voice came from behind him, flat and hard. Whistler was shaking, not from the cold, from the guilt that was already wrapping itself around his chest like a belt cinching tighter with every second. "I went to the head. 5 minutes. Maybe 7. I came back and she was—" "How long, Whistler?" 30 minutes. Maybe 40. I thought she was sleeping. The blanket was 40 minutes. Cole looked at the sky, looked at the road, calculated the math the way he'd calculated fire zones and extraction windows in places with no names. A child on foot in a town this size. 40 minutes. 2 miles, maybe 3 if she was moving fast. But she wouldn't be moving randomly. The notebook said she knew exactly where she was going. "She folded the blanket," Big Phil said quietly from the doorway. Everyone turned. Phil was staring at the couch where Mara had slept. The blanket, folded with military precision. The notebook, placed open to the exact page she wanted them to find. The pencil, set parallel to the spine. She didn't run. She deployed. The word sat in the room like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Elias came back inside. His face was a mask, but the cracks were showing. Hairline fractures running through the composure he'd rebuilt over 3 years of sobriety and 7 years of trying to forget the sound Dale Sutter's voice made through a steel food slot. He picked up the notebook, held it under the shop light, studied the map the way a medic studies a wound, clinically, urgently, already calculating what could be saved and what was already lost. "Building 4, he said. She drew this from memory. Look at the detail. Entry points, sight lines, even the direction of the security lights. This isn't the school. This is somewhere else. Somewhere she's been. Or somewhere she's watched," Roach said, leaning over his shoulder. Roach's eyes moved across the map the way they moved across highway routes, absorbing geometry, calculating distances, finding the fastest line between 2 points. "There's a number here. Bottom left. Looks like an address. 4120. 4120 what?" Roach was already moving to the laptop. His fingers hit the keys with the staccato urgency of a man who understood that every minute they spent in this room was a minute Mara spent alone in the cold, moving towards something that could kill her. Industrial corridor south of town, past the rail yard. Old storage facilities, mostly abandoned since the mill closed. Let me pull the lot map. While Roach worked, Cole turned to face the room. Every man was standing. Every man was waiting. And in the silence between heartbeats, the fracture that had been forming since the night before finally cracked open. "This is wrong," Tommy Raines said it, the youngest, the one who still flinched at backfires. He was standing near the pool table with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and the particular tension in his shoulders that Cole recognized as the posture of a man about to say something that would cost him. "All of it. This is wrong." "Explain," Cole said. "She's 14. She walked into a diner full of strangers and handed us a photograph, and now we're, what, running a counter-surveillance operation based on a child's drawings? We should have called the police the second she sat down. We should have called CPS. We should have—" "We went to the school," Elias said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of something heavy dropping from a height. "We brought evidence. They threatened us with defamation. Then we go higher. County, state, FBI, someone with a badge and a warrant. And while we make phone calls and fill out forms and wait for someone to return a voicemail, where is she?" Elias took a step toward Tommy. Not aggressive. Worse. Controlled. The controlled movement of a man who had spent 9 years learning how to move through spaces full of dangerous people without triggering an explosion. "Where is she right now, Tommy? Standing in a field somewhere? Hiding behind a dumpster? Or walking into a building where a man who has spent his entire life learning how to hurt children is waiting?" Tommy didn't back down. His eyes were wet, but his stance was solid. "And what happens when we find her, and we find him, and something goes sideways, and one of us ends up in a cell? What happens to her then? Who protects her when we're all sitting in county lockup on assault charges because we played cowboy instead of—" "Enough!" Cole's voice cut through the room like a blade through rope. Not loud, never loud, but final. The kind of voice that ends arguments not by winning them, but by making it clear that the argument is a luxury they cannot afford. Tommy's mouth closed, his jaw worked. He looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at Cole. "I'm not saying don't go. I'm saying think about what we're walking into, because this isn't a charity ride, and it isn't a bar fight. This is a child's life, and if we get this wrong—" "We won't," Cole said. "You don't know that." "No, I don't." Cole held Tommy's gaze. "But I know what happens if we don't move, and I've lived with that kind of knowing before. I won't do it again." The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites the air in a room. Tommy looked at Elias. Elias looked at Tommy. And something passed between them. Not agreement, not forgiveness, but the recognition that they were both right and both terrified, and that being right and being terrified had never stopped anything from happening. "I'm in," Tommy said. "But we do this smart." "We do this smart," Cole confirmed. Roach looked up from the laptop. "Got it. 4120 Mill Race Road. Industrial Storage Complex, 12 units. Ownership traces to a holding company registered in Delaware. Shell Corp, no real names. Property tax is current, which means somebody's paying to keep it off the abandoned list. County records show 1 active utility account. Unit 4. Unit 4, Elias repeated. Building 4, that's what she wrote. Power's been on since August. Same month Garris, Sutter, started at the school. The room absorbed that. August. The man had secured the storage unit before he even applied for the job. He had prepared the ground, laid the infrastructure, built the nest before he started hunting. Cole pulled his phone from his cut. He dialed a number. It rang 4 times. 5. He hung up, tried again. This time a voice answered. Muffled, distant, the sound of someone who had been woken from sleep or something close to it. "Mercy." Cole said the name like a code. "It's Cole. I need the favor you owe me, right now." Mercy Langford was a woman who ran a crisis center for foster kids 2 counties over. She was not a member of the Iron Revenants. She was not a biker. She was a 50-year-old former family court attorney who had burned every professional bridge she had when she testified against a judge who was rubber-stamping placements into known abusive homes. The iron revenants had helped her once, 3 years ago, when a man she'd testified against showed up at her center at 2 in the morning with a crowbar and a grudge. They had shown up first. They always showed up first. "I need you to make a call," Cole said. "To someone with a badge who isn't bought. Someone who will move on a tip without running it through a chain of command that leaks like a sieve." A pause. "How bad?" "As bad as it gets." Another pause. Longer. "I know someone. State police, criminal investigations. She doesn't play games and she doesn't owe anyone favors, which means she can't be called off. But Cole, if you're sending her into something, it better be real." "It's real." "Give me 20 minutes. Cole hung up. He looked at the room. "We move in 2 groups. Elias, Dutch, and Phil. You're with me. South Corridor, Mill Race Road. We find the building, we find Mara, we secure her. We do not engage the target unless there is no alternative. Tommy, Whistler, Roach, you sweep the school. If Sutter's there, you watch him. You don't approach. You don't speak to him. You keep eyes on him until I call." "And if he's not at the school?" Dutch asked. The question hung in the air like the aftertaste of something bitter. "Then he's somewhere else," Cole said. "And we better find Mara first." They rode. 4 bikes south, 3 north. The sound of 7 Harleys firing up simultaneously in a concrete garage is not a sound. It's a concussion, a physical force that you feel in your sternum and your teeth and the base of your skull. It rattled the windows. It shook the photographs on the wall behind the bar. And then they were gone, splitting at the intersection like a river dividing around a stone, each tributary carrying its own current of purpose and dread toward a destination that none of them could see clearly, but all of them could feel. The industrial corridor south of Ridgemont was a graveyard of commerce. Chain-link fences with rusted locks, loading docks where weeds grew through the cracks in the concrete, buildings with broken windows that stared out at the road like empty eye sockets. The mill that had once employed half the town stood at the far end, its smokestacks cold, its parking lot empty, its chain-link perimeter decorated with a real estate sign so faded by weather that the phone number was illegible. Mill Race Road ran parallel to the rail yard. The storage complex sat at the end of it, 12 units in 2 rows of 6, separated by a cracked asphalt lane barely wide enough for a truck. Most of the units had roll-up doors streaked with rust and padlocked with hardware, so corroded it had become one with the metal. Weeds pushed through every seam. A security light at the entrance flickered with the irregular rhythm of a dying heartbeat. Cole killed his engine a quarter mile out. The others followed. They walked the last stretch in silence, boots on wet gravel, breath visible in the cold air. Bill carried a bolt cutter in his left hand. Dutch had a flashlight. Elias carried nothing but the photograph in his inside pocket and the weight of 9 months of memory that was pressing against his chest like a stone. Unit 4 was in the second row, 3rd from the left, and even from 50 yards away, they could see what Mara's drawing had told them. One lock that didn't match the others. New. Silver. Industrial grade, standing out against the rust and decay like a fresh wound on old skin. Cole raised his fist. They stopped. He listened. Wind. The distant clatter of a freight train somewhere east of the yard. The tick of cooling engines from their bikes. And beneath it all, the kind of silence that isn't silence at all, but the held breath of something waiting. "Light inside," Dutch said. He was right. A thin line of pale illumination leaked from beneath the roll-up door. Not daylight. Artificial, steady. Cole looked at Elias. Elias's face was stone. His hands were fists at his sides. The tendons in his neck stood out like cables. "If she's in there," Elias began, "then we get her out." Cole's voice left no room for anything else. "Phil, the lock." Big Phil stepped forward. The bolt cutter's jaws closed around the hasp of the padlock. The metal resisted for half a second, then gave with a sound like a bone snapping. Clean, final, irreversible. Phil pulled the lock free and stepped back. Cole grabbed the handle at the bottom of the roll-up door. He looked at each man. One nod. He pulled. The door went up with a shriek of metal on metal that split the silence like a scream. Light poured out. Not bright, but enough. A single work lamp clamped to a metal shelf, extension cord running to an outlet on the far wall. And inside, not what they expected. The unit was empty. No furniture, no person, just concrete floor, metal walls, and the work lamp casting hard shadows across the space, but not entirely empty. On the floor, arranged with the careful precision of a museum exhibit, was a collection of objects that made the air in Elias's lungs turn to ice. Children's shoes. 6 pairs, different sizes, arranged in a row from smallest to largest. Behind them, pinned to the back wall with pushpins, a series of photographs. Not school pictures. Surveillance photographs. Children walking to buses, playing at recess, sitting on benches outside convenience stores, each one taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Each one labeled on the back with a date and a first name written in small, neat handwriting. And in the corner, a sleeping bag, a camp stove, a jug of water, and a prepaid phone still plugged into a wall charger. He wasn't keeping anyone here. Not yet. This was preparation. This was the collection phase. The watching, the selecting, the patient construction of a hunting ground. Dale Sutter had done this before. Elias knew that, had read the case files, had seen the pattern. And here it was, laid out on a concrete floor like a blueprint for something unspeakable. Dutch turned away. He walked 3 steps toward the door and stopped and put his hands on his knees and breathed through his nose like a man trying not to vomit. Phil stood perfectly still, the bolt cutter hanging from one hand, staring at the shoes with an expression that was no longer an expression at all, but a window into something ancient and savage and absolutely controlled. Elias moved through the space. He didn't touch anything. Years of institutional training overrode everything else. You don't contaminate a scene, you don't move evidence, you observe and you document and you let the fury eat you alive later when you're alone and the walls can't hear you scream. He looked at the photographs on the wall, counted them. 14. 14 children. 14 faces caught unaware by a man with a camera and a patience that defied human comprehension. And there, third from the left, bottom row, Mara Holloway, walking across the school parking lot, backpack over one shoulder, head down, alone. She had been right about everything, every drawing, every note, every mapped route in her composition notebook. She had been right, and every adult in her life had called her a liar. "She's not here," Cole said. He was standing at the center of the unit, turning slowly, reading the space the way a tracker reads ground sign. But she was. "Look." He pointed at the floor near the entrance. Wet sneaker prints. Small. Fresh. The water hadn't fully evaporated yet. "She came here," Elias said. "She knew about this place. She's been watching him watch them." But she didn't stay. Cole crouched beside the prints. They led in and then back out. A single set. No overlap. No hesitation. She had come in, seen what was here, and left. She saw this, and she kept moving. Kept moving where? Cole stood up. His phone was already in his hand. He dialed Roach. "Talk to me." Roach's voice came through tight, clipped, the voice of a man delivering bad news while riding. "He's not at the school. Called in sick this morning. First absence all year." The sentence hit the room like a flashbang. Every man felt it in a different place. Gut, chest, throat, the back of the skull where instinct lives. Cole closed his eyes for 1 second. 1. Then they opened and they were different, harder, colder. The eyes of a man who has just crossed a line that only exists inside him, a line between restraint and whatever lies beyond it. "His van," Cole said. "White utility. We got the plate from Tommy's photo. Whistler's already running it. Find it, now. Drop everything else and find that van." He hung up. He looked at Elias. Elias was staring at Mara's sneaker prints on the concrete floor, and the expression on his face was something Cole had only seen once before. In a hospital room in Landstuhl, Germany, 17 years ago, on the face of a man who had just been told that the convoy he was supposed to be leading had been hit, and everyone in it was gone. The expression of a man whose failure has suddenly become geography, a place he will live in for the rest of his life. "This is my fault," Elias said. "No. I processed him, 7 years ago, I watched him every day for 9 months. I wrote the reports. I could have... Could have what? Cole's voice was sharp enough to cut. Not cruel. Surgical. The kind of sharpness that slices through self-destruction before it takes root. Could have what, Elias? Kept him locked up personally? Stood outside his cell for the rest of your life? You did your job. The system failed. It always fails. That's why we're here. She's out there alone because I didn't... She's out there alone because she's spent her entire life learning that the only person she can count on is herself. And right now, she's doing what she's always done. The question is whether we're going to stand here bleeding over the past or go find her before the past becomes permanent. Elias looked at Cole. The fire behind his eyes was still there, but something else had joined it, something sharper, something that cut both ways. Not just fury at Sutter, fury at himself, at the system, at every form he had filed and every report he had written that had amounted to nothing, because the machinery of justice was not a machine at all, but a collection of human beings, each one capable of looking the other way. "Let's go," Elias said. They left the storage unit exactly as they found it, minus the lock. Cole called Mercy Langford's contact at state police from the road. He described the location. He described the contents. He used precise clinical language, the language of a man who has given operational briefings under fire and understands that clarity saves lives and emotion wastes time. The woman on the other end of the line listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said 2 words, "Don't touch anything," and hung up. They rode north, back toward the school, because north was the direction Mara's sneaker prints had pointed, and because north was where the white van was not, and that meant north was where Sutter might be, and where Sutter might be was where Mara was going. The phone rang at 11:14. Whistler. "We found the van." Cole pulled over. Gravel, shoulder of Route 9. The others stopped behind him in formation, engines idling, exhaust rising into the gray air like the breath of something alive and restless. "Where?" "Parking lot behind the Family Dollar on Crane Street. Engine's cold. Been here a while." "Crane Street." Cole ran the geography in his head. Ridgemont was a small town. Crane Street was 4 blocks from the school, 2 blocks from the public library, 6 blocks from the Burden residence, Mara's foster home. "What's within walking distance?" "Everything. That's the problem. He could be anywhere in a 10-block radius." Cole thought. He thought the way he used to think when the radio was screaming and the map was wrong and the convoy was stopped and the only thing between his people and the kill zone was whatever he decided in the next 4 seconds. "Mara wouldn't go home," he said. "She left home. She wouldn't go back to the school. She knows he's not there. She's following him, not the van. Him." He paused. "Where does a man go when he calls in sick to work and parks his van 4 blocks away?" Elias, who had pulled up beside him, spoke through the wind. "Somewhere he doesn't want the van seen. Somewhere he's going on foot because a vehicle would attract attention." "The neighborhoods," Cole said. "The residential blocks, where the kids live." Elias's face went white beneath the road grime. "She wrote it in the notebook. He has another one. Not at the storage unit. Another child. Someone he's already..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Cole's phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. He looked at the screen. 4 words. No signature. Sent from a number that didn't exist in any contact list, on a phone that had been purchased with cash at a gas station by a 14-year-old girl who had learned through years of institutional failure and adult indifference that the only way to be heard was to leave a trail for the people who were actually willing to follow it. The text read, 1847 Birch. "He's inside." Cole showed the screen to Elias. Elias read it, and his hands gripped the handlebars so tight the leather of his gloves creaked. "She found him," Elias said. "She found him," Cole repeated. "And she's there. Right now. Outside that house. Watching." Cole looked down the road. North. Toward a residential street in a dying town where a man who had spent his life disappearing was inside a house that wasn't his, doing something that no locked door and no failed system and no buried paperwork could ever undo once it was done. He kicked the bike to life. The engine roared. Behind him, 3 more engines answered. They rode toward Birch Street with the throttle wide open and the wind cutting through their jackets like a blade, and none of them spoke because there was nothing left to say. The point of no return was not ahead of them. It was already behind them. It had been behind them since the moment a girl walked into a diner and placed a photograph on a table and said 5 words that cracked the world open. The only question left was what they would find when they got there, and whether they would get there in time. Birch Street was 4 blocks long and lined with houses that had been built in the 1970s for mill workers who no longer existed. Small lots, chain-link fences, driveways cracked down the center where tree roots had pushed through decades ago, and nobody had bothered to fix them because fixing things cost money, and money had left this town with the jobs. Half the houses were dark. Some had plywood over windows. A few still had Christmas lights from a season that had passed without anyone caring enough to take them down, the bulbs dead, the wires sagging like old veins. 1847 was near the end of the block. A single-story ranch with beige siding gone gray from neglect. A porch light that wasn't on. A driveway with no car. The yard was mud and dead grass and a plastic tricycle tipped on its side near the front steps, its wheels still turning slowly in the wind like the last movement of something that had stopped being alive. Cole cut his engine a block and a half out. The others followed. Silence rushed in to fill the space where the Harleys had been, and in that silence the world became painfully, unbearably detailed. The drip of rain from a gutter, the distant bark of a dog 3 streets over, the creak of a chain-link gate swinging on a broken latch. Everything amplified. Everything sharp. The way the world gets when your body understands what your mind hasn't admitted yet, that what happens in the next few minutes will divide your life into before and after. Elias was off his bike before the kickstand was down. Cole caught his arm. Not hard. Firm. The grip of a man who has pulled other men back from edges, literal and otherwise, more times than he can count. Wait. She's here, Cole. She texted from... Wait! Cole's eyes swept the street. Houses, fences, parked cars, angles of approach, lines of sight. He wasn't seeing a neighborhood. He was seeing a terrain map, the same way he'd seen every piece of ground since the day his brain got rewired by 14 months of convoy duty in a place where every road was a question and every answer could kill you. We don't know what's inside. We don't know if he's armed. We don't know if there's another exit. There's a kid inside. There might be 2 kids inside, and one man who has spent his life making sure he's never caught. You want to go through that front door blind? Because I've gone through doors blind, and the people behind me paid for it. That stopped Elias. Not the logic, the pain beneath it. The way Cole's voice cracked on the word paid, a fracture so small you'd miss it if you didn't know him. But Elias knew him. They all knew him. And they all knew about the door in Ramadi that Cole went through first and came out of last and never talked about except once, 3 years ago, in a parking lot after a funeral, when he'd said 6 words to Elias and then walked away and didn't speak again for a week. Dutch, back of the house. Find the rear exit, cover it. Phil, stay on the street. If a vehicle approaches, any vehicle, you block it. Elias, you're with me. Dutch moved without a word. He crossed the neighboring yard in a low crouch that was muscle memory from a life he'd lived before the cut, before the bike, before the sunglasses became a wall he built between himself and everything he didn't want to see. Phil positioned himself on the sidewalk, arms crossed, 6'3" and 260 pounds of absolute stillness. He looked like a man waiting for a bus. He looked like a man who could stop one with his hands. Cole and Elias approached the house from the left side, using the neighbor's fence for cover. The ground was soft. Their boots sank into mud with each step, leaving prints that filled with dark water behind them. Rain came down in a fine, persistent mist that coated everything, leather, skin, metal, with a cold sheen that made the world look like it had been wrapped in wet cellophane. They reached the side of the house, a window, blinds drawn, but not all the way. A gap at the bottom, maybe 2 inches, where the lowest slat had bent or broken. Light inside. Not overhead light. Something lower. A lamp, a screen, something that cast moving shadows across the ceiling. Cole positioned himself below the window. Elias crouched beside him. Their breathing synchronized without either of them deciding to do it. An old habit from 100 runs, 100 approaches, 100 moments crouched beside each other in the dark, waiting for the signal to move. Cole rose just enough to see through the gap. The living room, small, carpeted in something brown and stained. A couch with a blanket thrown over it. A television playing with the volume off. Images flickering without sound, casting the room in shifting blue light. A coffee table with a laptop open on it, screen angled away from the window. And there, in a doorway that led to what looked like a hall, a man. Standing, his back partially turned, collared shirt, work boots. The build was right. The posture was right, weight forward, slightly coiled, the stance of someone who was always ready to move. But he wasn't alone. In the living room, on the floor between the couch and the television, sat a child. A boy. Young, 8, maybe 9. He was sitting cross-legged on the carpet with a coloring book open in front of him, and a box of crayons beside him, and the utter, terrible stillness of a child who has learned that making noise is dangerous. He wasn't coloring. He was holding a crayon in his hand and staring at the page without moving, the way a rabbit freezes when it hears a sound it doesn't recognize. Not calm, not comfortable, but locked in the particular paralysis of prey that understands, on some cellular level, that the thing in the room with it is not safe. Cole lowered himself below the window. The expression on his face had changed. Something had drained out of it. Color, maybe, or the last residue of the professional detachment he'd been maintaining since the diner. What replaced it was something Elias had seen only once before, in that parking lot after that funeral. And it was not rage, and it was not fear. It was the absolute, crystallized certainty of a man who has just seen something that cannot be allowed to continue for one more second. "Boy inside," Cole said. 8 or 9, on the floor, Sutter's in the doorway. Elias closed his eyes. 8 or 9. The age when the world is supposed to be big enough to be exciting and small enough to be safe. The age when your biggest fear should be the dark at the top of the stairs. Not the man standing in the doorway of a house that isn't yours on a street where nobody is looking. "Where's Mara?" Elias asked. Cole shook his head. Not inside. Not visible. But she had texted from somewhere close. She was watching. She had led them here because she understood, with the instinct of a child who had been failed so many times that failure had become her native language, that this was the moment. Not the storage unit with its shrine of photographs and its row of children's shoes. This. Right now. The act in progress. The proof that no administrator could dismiss and no caseworker could file away and no foster parent could call attention-seeking. Cole's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. A second text from the unknown number. Back porch. Under the steps. Hurry. Cole showed it to Elias. They moved along the side of the house toward the back. The yard was fenced, 4-foot chain link, gate hanging open. Dutch was already there, pressed against the rear wall beside a sliding glass door with a curtain drawn across it. He shook his head. No movement visible from the back. The porch was 3 wooden steps leading to the back door. Beneath the steps, in the dark crawl space between the bottom stair and the muddy ground, a shadow moved. Elias crouched. Mara. The shadow shifted. A face appeared. Pale, streaked with mud, eyes wide but not panicked. She was lying flat on her stomach in the dirt beneath the porch, with her phone clutched in one hand and the other pressed flat against the ground, like she was trying to hold the earth in place. Her hoodie was soaked through. Her sneakers were gone. She'd taken them off to move quietly, and her socks were black with mud and something that might have been blood from where she'd cut her foot on something in the dark. "He brought the boy 20 minutes ago," she whispered. Her voice was controlled, steady, carrying the same flat precision it had carried in the diner. Pulled up in someone else's car. Not the van. A gray sedan. The boy was asleep, carried him inside. Asleep or drugged? Elias asked, and hated himself for asking because the question meant he already knew the answer and was hoping to be wrong. He wasn't moving right. His head was loose, like a puppet. Elias's stomach dropped. The sensation was physical, a weight plunging from his chest to his gut like a stone falling through water. Sedated. The boy had been sedated, which meant this wasn't an impulse. This was a plan. This was the culmination of weeks or months of grooming and selection and preparation, and the storage unit on Mill Race Road had been Phase 1, and this house on Birch Street was Phase 2, and somewhere in between, a man who should have been behind bars had looked at a child and decided that today was the day. "Come out," Cole said softly. Mara shook her head. "Not yet. You need to know something first." "Mara?" "The house." Her voice dropped lower. Her eyes locked on Cole's with an intensity that belonged on a face 3 times her age. "It's not his. I checked the mailbox when I got here. The name on the mail is Burden." The word hit Elias like a physical blow. Burden. The foster family. Mara's foster family. "This is your foster parents' house?" Elias said. "They're rental. They own 2 properties. This one's been empty since October. They told the agency they were renovating it." Mara's jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes. Not tears, not fear, but the particular devastation of a child who has just confirmed the last hope she had was a lie. "He has a key. He didn't break in. He has a key." The silence that followed was not silence. It was the sound of understanding arriving, heavy, slow, inevitable, like a freight train you can hear for miles before it reaches the crossing. The Burdens, Mara's foster parents, the people the state had trusted to protect her. They hadn't just ignored her warnings. They had provided the location, the empty house, the key. They were part of it. Cole looked at Dutch. Dutch looked at the ground. His hands were shaking, a tremor so fine it was almost invisible. But it was there, the physical manifestation of a rage so deep it had bypassed the muscles that controlled his fists and gone straight to the nervous system itself. "How long have you known?" Cole asked Mara. "I wasn't sure until today. I thought maybe he broke in, maybe he picked the lock, but the alarm." She pointed toward the back door. A small keypad was visible through the glass, green light, disarmed. "You need the code for that. I only know it because I watched Mrs. Burden enter it once when she brought me here to pick up a box. 7,241. He punched it in without looking. 7 years of corrections work, 9 months of watching Dale Sutter through reinforced glass, 3 years of sobriety built on the belief that the system, for all its flaws, at least functioned. Elias felt all of it collapsing inward, folding in on itself like a building in demolition, controlled at first, then uncontrolled, then just rubble and dust and the ringing silence afterward. The Burdens weren't negligent foster parents who couldn't be bothered to listen. They were accomplices. They had taken in a foster child and simultaneously provided a convicted predator with a safe house. Whether they knew who Sutter really was or simply didn't care was a distinction that made no moral difference whatsoever. And Mara had been living in their home, sleeping under their roof, eating at their table, knowing, suspecting, then knowing that the people who were supposed to keep her safe were the ones holding the door open. "Mara," Elias said. His voice came out wrong, too thick, too raw. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Mara, come out from under there. Right now." She looked at him. For the first time, something in her expression shifted. Not broke. She was too practiced at holding herself together for that. But shifted. Like a mask slipping half an inch before being pressed back into place. "Are you going to get him out?" she asked. "Yes." "Promise me." Elias looked at this girl, 14 years old, lying in the mud under a porch in wet socks with a cut on her foot, having spent the last 3 months building a case against a monster while living in the home of his collaborators, having tried 3 adults and been failed by all 3, having walked into a diner full of strangers as a last resort, having disappeared from the one place she felt safe to come here, alone, because she discovered there was another child and she couldn't live with herself if she didn't try. And he made the only promise he had ever made in his life that he knew, with absolute certainty, he would keep. "I promise." She crawled out. Cole caught her, lifted her, set her on her feet. She was shaking now. Not from cold, though she was freezing, but from the release of adrenaline that had been holding her upright for hours. Dutch took off his leather cut and draped it over her shoulders. It hung past her knees. She pulled it tight around herself and stood there in the mud, barefoot, shivering, looking like something between a soldier and a ghost. "Dutch," Cole said. "Take her to the street, Phil's there. Stay with her. I'm not leaving, Mara said. You're not. Cole crouched so he was at her eye level. You're going to stand with Phil where I can see you when I come out that door. That's your post. You hold it. She understood. It wasn't dismissal. It was assignment. And something in the way Cole said it, the gravity, the respect, the absolute seriousness, reached whatever part of her was still capable of trusting an adult and held on to it. She went with Dutch. Cole and Elias stood at the back door, the sliding glass, the curtain, the keypad with its green light. Inside, somewhere beyond the hallway, a man and a child in a room that no one was supposed to know about, in a house that no one was supposed to be watching, in a town where every institution designed to prevent exactly this had either looked away or actively conspired. Cole tried the handle. Unlocked. Of course it was. Why would you lock a door when you have the only key and the alarm code and the foster parents and the school and the counselors and the caseworkers all building walls between you and consequence? Why would you lock a door when the entire architecture of a small town's indifference has been doing it for you? The door slid open. The curtain moved. Cold air from outside pushed against warm air from inside and created a pressure difference that Elias felt on his face like a hand. They stepped inside. The kitchen. Linoleum floor. A counter with nothing on it. A refrigerator humming. The air smelled like dust and old carpet and something chemical. Not cleaning products. Something sharper. Medicinal. The smell of whatever Sutter had used to sedate the boy. Cole moved first. Elias behind. They crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. The hallway opened in front of them. Narrow, dark, 3 doors. One closed. One open to an empty bathroom, toilet lit up, faucet dripping. One at the end, half open, light leaking around the frame. From behind that door, a voice, low, conversational. The easy, practiced tone of a man talking to a child. Soothing, patient. The voice of someone who had done this enough times that it had become routine, like a mechanic explaining to a customer what was wrong with their car. Normal. Ordinary. The normalcy of it was the most sickening thing Elias had ever heard, worse than any sound from any cell block. Worse than anything he'd encountered in 9 years of walking past cages full of men who had done terrible things. Because at least those men were behind bars. At least those men had been caught. At least the system had, for one brief moment, functioned. This man was free. This man was using a voice that sounded like a children's television host. And behind that door, a boy who should have been safe in his own home was sitting on the floor of a stranger's empty rental property, drugged, alone, listening to that voice. Cole put his hand on the door. Elias put his hand on Cole's forearm. They looked at each other. No words. A conversation conducted entirely in the silence between 2 men who had both been trained to enter rooms that contained things they didn't want to see. Cole's eyes asked the question. Elias's grip answered it, together. Cole pushed the door open. The room was a bedroom, empty except for a mattress on the floor. No frame, no sheets, just a bare mattress with a sleeping bag unrolled on it. The work lamp from the living room had been moved in here, clamped to a curtain rod, casting a harsh downward light that turned everything beneath it into sharp shadows and bright, unforgiven detail. The boy was on the mattress, still sitting, still holding the crayon. His eyes were open but unfocused, the glassy half-awareness of a child fighting through sedation, trying to surface, unable to break through. Sutter was crouched beside him. He looked up when the door opened, and in that moment, that fraction of a second between the door swinging wide and the first word spoken, Elias saw something on Sutter's face that he would carry for the rest of his life. Not surprise. Not fear. Annoyance. The mild, inconvenienced expression of a man whose routine has been interrupted, as if Cole and Elias were maintenance workers who had come to fix the plumbing at an inconvenient time. Then Sutter's expression changed, because he recognized Elias. 7 years, different hair, different context, but he recognized him. The annoyance dissolved and something else replaced it. Not fear, not yet. Calculation. The rapid practiced computation of a man who has spent his life evaluating exits and angles and odds and deciding, in the span of a heartbeat, whether to fight, run, or talk. He chose talk. Officer Crow. The voice was calm, conversational, the same tone he'd been using with the boy. "It's been a while." Elias didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat had closed. Not from fear, from the physical effort of containing something that was trying to claw its way out of him. Something primal, something pre-language, something that lived in the part of the brain that existed before civilization decided that there were rules about what you could do to people who hurt children. Cole spoke instead. "Step away from the boy." Sutter didn't move. He looked at Cole, looked at Elias, looked at the hallway behind them, calculating, always calculating. "This isn't what it looks like," Sutter said. "Step away from the boy." Cole's voice hadn't changed. Same tone, same volume, same absolute granite certainty. But something underneath it had shifted. A tectonic movement, deep and slow, the kind that precedes earthquakes. Sutter stood, slowly. His hands came up. Not raised in surrender, just visible, the gesture of a man performing innocence. "I'm babysitting, for a friend. You can call—" "We found the storage unit," Elias said. His voice came back, and it didn't sound like his voice. It sounded like something that had been scraped along concrete and set on fire. "Unit 4, Mill Race Road. The photographs, the shoes." The calculation behind Sutter's eyes collapsed. For the first time, something genuine appeared on his face. And it was not remorse, not shame, not the recognition of wrongdoing. It was rage. The cold, narcissistic fury of a man whose careful construction has been dismantled, whose meticulous planning has been undone, whose patient, years-long architecture of predation has been exposed not by any institution or investigation, but by a 14-year-old girl he had already cataloged and photographed and pinned to a wall. He moved. Not toward the door, not toward Cole or Elias. Toward the boy. A single fast step. The movement of a man reaching for leverage, for a shield, for the one piece of currency he had left in a room where everything else had been taken from him. Cole got there first. It wasn't technique, it wasn't training, it was something older than both. The raw, absolute refusal of a man who has spent his entire adult life standing between vulnerability and violence. Cole's body moved before his mind finished processing what was happening. He caught Sutter's arm at the wrist, redirected the momentum, and put himself between Sutter and the mattress in a motion so fluid it looked choreographed, but was in fact the product of a nervous system that had been rebuilt by combat into something that operated faster than thought. Sutter hit the wall. Not thrown, guided. The difference mattered. Cole didn't slam him. He placed him. Against the drywall, one hand on his chest, one hand still controlling the wrist. Controlled, precise. The minimum force necessary to create distance between a predator and his prey. But the fury behind that control, the fury that lived in Cole's forearms, in his locked jaw, in the tendons standing out on his neck like bridge cables, that was something else entirely. That was the fury of a man who had seen the tricycle in the front yard, the one with the wheel still turning in the wind, and had understood what it meant. That a child lived here. That a child had been brought here. That a child was sitting on a bare mattress on the floor of an empty house, holding a crayon and fighting through sedation while a man with a stolen name and a compass rose tattoo crouched beside him and used a voice that sounded like safety, but was anything but. "Elias," Cole said. "Get the boy." Elias moved to the mattress. He knelt. The boy looked at him with eyes that couldn't quite focus, swimming, drifting, fighting to stay on the surface of consciousness. Elias picked him up. The boy weighed nothing. He was small and warm, and his head fell against Elias's shoulder with the loose, terrible weight of a child who should have been asleep in his own bed instead of here, in this room, in this house, in this moment. Elias carried him out of the room, down the hallway, through the kitchen, out the back door and into the cold air and the rain that was still falling, falling, falling like the sky was trying to wash something away that couldn't be washed. Dutch was at the fence. He saw Elias. He saw the boy. His sunglasses were off. His eyes were red. "Call Mercy," Elias said. "Call her contact. State police. Now. Right now." Inside the house, Cole still held Sutter against the wall. The two men were alone. The lamp buzzed. The rain hit the window. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and stopped. You know what happens next, Cole said. Sutter looked at him. The calculation was back, slower now, more desperate, the math of a cornered animal running out of options. I want a lawyer. You'll get one. You'll get a cell and a number and a trial and everything the system gives people like you. But right now in this room, you're going to tell me one thing. Cole leaned closer, close enough to feel Sutter's breath, close enough to see the compass rose on his wrist, the ink faded but still readable, the points still sharp. How many? Sutter didn't answer. The shoes in the storage unit, 6 pairs, different sizes, different years. Cole's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, and in that whisper was the full weight of every door he had ever gone through, every convoy he had ever led, every name he had ever memorized on a wall of photographs in a clubhouse that smelled like motor oil and grief. How many? Sutter smiled, and the smile was the worst thing in the room. Worse than the mattress, worse than the lamp, worse than the boy's loose head and the chemical smell and the coloring book with its untouched pages. The smile was the thing that told Cole everything he needed to know about the distance between the man pinned to this wall and anything resembling humanity. More than you'll find, Sutter said. Cole's hand trembled, once. A single vibration that traveled from his wrist to his shoulder and disappeared. He breathed in, he breathed out. Then he heard the sirens. They came from the north. 2, 3, no, 4 distinct vehicles, their lights painting the walls of the houses red and blue in a rhythm that was not beautiful, but was, in this moment, the closest thing to beauty that existed in the world. Mercy's contact had moved fast. State police, criminal investigations, the people who didn't answer to the school board or the county administrators or the foster care agency that had placed a child in a home owned by collaborators. Cole stepped back. He released Sutter's wrist. He looked at the man who had smiled and said more than you'll find, and he made a decision that would cost him more than any bullet or any blast or any door he had ever walked through. He let the system have him, not because he trusted the system, not because he believed it would work, but because a girl named Mara Holloway had spent 71 days building a case that was meticulous and devastating and irrefutable. And if Cole did what every cell in his body was screaming at him to do, that case would be destroyed in a courtroom by a defense attorney who would point at the bruises and say the word vigilante, and every photograph on that storage unit wall would become inadmissible, and every child those photographs represented would become invisible again. So he let the system have him. He stepped back and he watched the sirens paint the walls, and he waited for the boots on the porch and the voices at the door and the machinery of law to grind forward in its slow, imperfect, agonizing way. But as he turned to leave the room, he stopped. He looked back at Sutter one more time. She found you, Cole said. A 14-year-old girl with a notebook and a pencil. She found you when nobody else would even look. Sutter's smile was gone. Cole walked out of the house and into the flashing lights and the rain and the cold and the sound of Elias's voice speaking to a state trooper and the sight of Big Phil standing on the sidewalk with his arms at his sides and tears running down his face that he didn't bother to wipe. And somewhere behind all of it, standing in Dutch's oversized leather cut with her bare feet in the mud and her eyes watching everything, Mara Holloway, who had saved herself and then come back to save someone else, and who would never again have to build her own early warning system out of pencils and paper because the men standing around her, broken and scarred and imperfect as they were, had finally shown her what it looked like when adults showed up. But even as the troopers entered the house and the handcuffs clicked, and Sutter was led to a cruiser, Elias stood apart from the others, holding the boy who was starting to stir against his shoulder, and he couldn't stop hearing those 4 words. More than you'll find. Because Sutter hadn't said it like a threat. He'd said it like a fact, like a man who had been doing this across state lines, across school districts, across years and identities and empty rental houses, and who knew that the shoes in the storage unit were not the end of the story, but the surface of something so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen from here. And the burdens were still out there, free. Unaware that their empty house had been breached and their monster had been caught and their foster child, the one they had called a liar, the one whose warnings they had buried, the one who had slept under their roof while they held the door open for a predator, had just cracked open a case that would grow and grow and grow until it swallowed everything they had built their comfortable, complicit lives upon. Elias looked at Cole across the flashing lights. Cole looked back, and they both understood without speaking that this night was not the end of anything. It was the beginning. And the thing that was beginning was bigger than one man and one town and one brotherhood of bikers who had sworn to stand between innocence and darkness. It was the kind of beginning that changes everyone it touches. And not all of them would survive it the same way they went in. The boy's name was Lucas Devane. He was 8 years old. He weighed 53 pounds. Elias knew this because the paramedics said it out loud while calculating the dosage for whatever Sutter had given him, and the number lodged itself in Elias's brain like a piece of shrapnel. Small, sharp, impossible to remove. 53 pounds. The weight of a second grader. The weight of a life that had been lifted off a bare mattress in a dark room by a man whose hands hadn't stopped shaking since. They took Lucas to Ridgemont General in the back of an ambulance that pulled away without sirens because the boy was stable, just sedated, just drugged by a man who had done this so many times that he knew the exact dosage for a child who weighed 53 pounds. Elias watched the ambulance until its taillights dissolved into the rain. Then he stood in the street and breathed and tried to remember what his therapist had told him about grounding techniques, about 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch. But the only thing he could see was the mattress, and the only thing he could touch was the ghost of that boy's weight against his shoulder. And the grounding technique failed because the ground itself had shifted beneath him, and nothing was where it was supposed to be. Cole was with the state police investigator, a woman named Sergeant Adler, compact, sharp-featured, early 40s, the kind of face that had stopped performing expressions years ago, and now simply communicated information through the arrangement of its angles. She had arrived in an unmarked sedan 6 minutes after the first cruisers and had taken control of the scene with a quiet efficiency that reminded Cole of field commanders he'd known. The real ones, not the ones who shouted, but the ones who lowered their voices as the situation escalated because they understood that volume was the enemy of clarity. Cole told her everything. The diner, the photograph, the school, Dr. Weeks, the storage unit, the burdens. He gave it in sequence, clean, no embellishment, the way he'd given after-action reports in another life. Adler listened with a digital recorder running and a notepad open and an expression that didn't change until he mentioned the burdens. Then something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise exactly, but the recognition of a pattern she had seen before, the moment when a case stops being a case and becomes an excavation. The foster parents provided the location, Adler said. Not a question. A confirmation. Mara identified their property. The alarm code was entered correctly. No forced entry. Adler wrote something in her notepad. Then she looked up at Cole with an expression that was as close to warmth as her face seemed capable of producing. The girl, Mara Holloway. Where is she now? With my men, on the sidewalk. I need to talk to her. She's 14 and she's been awake for I don't know how many hours. She's barefoot in the mud. She needs shoes and a blanket, and someone who isn't going to ask her to relive the worst night of her life in the back of a police cruiser. Adler studied him, measured him, decided something. Mercy Langford is on her way. She runs. I know who she is. I'm the one who called her. Then you know she's the best person to sit with that girl right now. But I need a statement, Mr. Maddox. Tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight, because she checked her watch, about 4 hours, a judge is going to be woken up for an emergency warrant on the Burden property, and what that girl knows will determine how many doors we can open. Cole nodded. He looked across the street to where Mara stood between Big Phil and Dutch, still wearing Dutch's cut, still barefoot, still watching everything with those eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. Phil had found a pair of wool socks somewhere, his own, probably, pulled from the saddlebag where he kept a change of clothes for the nights he couldn't face going home to an empty apartment. And Mara was wearing them, the thick gray wool reaching almost to her knees, and she looked absurd and fragile and unbreakable all at once. Give Mercy 30 minutes with her first, Cole said. Then she'll talk. 30 minutes, Adler agreed. Mercy Langford arrived at 12:47 a.m. in a dented Honda Civic with a child's car seat in the back and a box of granola bars on the passenger seat. She was 50 years old with gray hair pulled back in a braid and the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades catching children that the system dropped. She didn't speak to Cole when she arrived. She didn't speak to the police. She walked directly to Mara, crouched down until they were eye to eye, and said something that nobody else could hear. Mara looked at her for a long time, then nodded once. Mercy took her to the Honda, turned on the heater, gave her a granola bar and a bottle of water and a pair of sneakers from the trunk that were one size too big but clean and dry and not covered in mud and blood. They sat in the car for 27 minutes. When they came back out, Mara's face was the same, guarded, watchful, controlled, but something in her posture had changed, slightly, almost imperceptibly. The way a fist unclenches one finger at a time. She gave her statement to Sergeant Adler, sitting on the tailgate of Cole's truck with a blanket around her shoulders, and Mercy Langford on one side and Elias Crow on the other. She spoke for 41 minutes. She did not cry. She did not pause. She answered every question with the precision of someone who had been building this testimony in her head for 71 days, waiting for someone to ask. When she finished, Adler closed her notepad. She looked at Mercy. She looked at Elias. She looked at Mara. "You did something tonight that most adults couldn't do," Adler said. Mara didn't respond. She pulled the blanket tighter and looked at the street where the patrol cars were still parked, and the lights were still flashing, and the house at 1847 Birch was being sealed with yellow tape by officers who moved through the rain with the grim efficiency of men who understood that what they were preserving was not a crime scene but a monument to systematic failure. At 1:30 a.m., Adler's phone rang. She stepped away, spoke for 3 minutes, came back with an expression that had changed, harder now, the angles of her face rearranged into something that Cole recognized as the look of a person who has just learned that the hole they're digging is deeper than they thought. "The Burdens aren't home," she said. "Officers went to their primary residence 20 minutes ago. House is empty. Cars are gone. Closets have gaps. Clothes removed recently. Bathroom cleared of toiletries." The words landed like hammer blows. "They ran," Elias said. "They knew," Cole said. "Somehow they knew." Adler shook her head. "Or they had a contingency. People involved in something like this. They plan for the moment it falls apart. They have bags packed. They have cash. They have routes. The school." Elias was on his feet. "Dr. Weeks, the principal, she called them. After we came in with the photograph. She called them and told them 2 men were asking questions, and they panicked, and they called Sutter, and Sutter panicked, and that's why he accelerated. That's why he took Lucas tonight instead of—" He stopped. The sentence was too heavy to finish. Instead of waiting, instead of being patient, instead of following the meticulous timeline he had been constructing for months. Sutter had moved early because someone at the school had tipped the dominoes, and the dominoes had fallen through Dr. Weeks to the Burdens to Sutter, and somewhere in that chain a child named Lucas Devane had been picked up and sedated and carried into an empty house because a principal decided to protect her institution instead of her students. "I need Weeks's phone records," Adler said, already moving, "and the Burdens' cell data, and I need them before whoever is on call at the county prosecutor's office has their morning coffee." She stopped, turned back. "Mr. Maddox, your club needs to go home. We're not done." "Yes, you are. You found the girl, you found the boy. You preserved a crime scene. You did everything right. But from this point forward, this is a criminal investigation involving a fugitive sex offender, accessory foster parents, and a potentially complicit school administrator. And if any of you are within 100 yards of the Burden family when we find them, a defense attorney will use your presence to blow holes in my case that I will never be able to repair." Cole looked at her. She was right. He knew she was right. Every year he'd spent in uniform, every operation he'd run, every briefing he'd attended had taught him the same lesson. The moment the mission transitions from rescue to prosecution, the rescuers become liabilities. Their presence contaminates. Their emotions compromise. Their desire for justice, real, earned, righteous justice, becomes the weapon that the other side uses to make justice impossible. He hated it. He hated it the way you hate the laws of physics when they tell you that the bridge you need to cross won't hold your weight. Not because the laws are wrong, because they're right. "Tommy," Cole said without turning around. Tommy was there. He'd been there the whole time, standing at the edge of the light, watching, listening, carrying the argument he'd made at the clubhouse. The one about playing cowboy, the one about ending up in cells, and watching it prove itself wrong and right simultaneously. Take Mara to the clubhouse. Whistler and Phil go with you. She doesn't leave your sight. What about Mercy? Tommy asked. Mercy comes too. She stays with Mara until the state assigns a new emergency placement. And us? Dutch asked. He had put his sunglasses back on even though it was the middle of the night. The habit was armor. Cole understood that. We wait. Cole looked at Adler. We wait and we let the sergeant do her job. And we trust that the system will work because a 14-year-old girl built a case so airtight that not even a bought judge could tear it apart. Adler met his gaze. Something passed between them. Not agreement, not trust, but the mutual recognition of two people who had both spent their lives inside systems that failed more often than they succeeded, and who both kept showing up anyway because the alternative was to stop, and stopping meant the failures became permanent. The club split. Tommy, Whistler, Phil, and Mercy took Mara north toward the clubhouse. Dutch and Roach followed Cole south to the industrial corridor where their bikes were parked. The street emptied. The rain continued. The lights kept flashing against the walls of 1847 birch, painting the same pattern over and over. Red, blue, the heartbeat of a house that had been dead for months and was only now being autopsied. At the clubhouse, Mara slept, not on the couch this time. In the room above the garage that Whistler had cleared out and furnished with an air mattress and a clean sleeping bag and a lamp that he left on because he understood, without being told, that a girl who had spent months mapping the movements of a predator would not want to be in the dark. Mercy sat in a chair beside the door. She didn't sleep. She hadn't slept through a case night in 20 years. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes open, and the particular vigilance of a woman who had built her entire life around being the person in the room who stayed awake. At 4:15 a.m., Cole's phone rang. Adler. We found the Burdens. Cole sat up on the clubhouse couch where he'd been lying with his boots on, and his eyes closed and his mind running through scenarios the way it used to run through mission parameters, endlessly, compulsively, testing every variable for the one that would fail. Where? Motel off I-74, 60 miles west. They were paying cash under a false name. The motel clerk recognized the vehicle description from the BOLO. Are they talking? A pause. The kind of pause that contains information in its shape, like the negative space in a photograph. He is, she isn't. The husband. Gerald Burden. He started talking before the Miranda was finished. Fell apart. The kind of man who participates in something monstrous and then crumbles the second the lights come on. Another pause. He's giving us everything. How long they've known Sutter. How many properties they've provided. How many cities. How many cities? 4 over 6 years. They followed Sutter, or he followed them. I'm not sure which yet. They would apply for foster care certification in a new city, establish themselves, provide housing, and Sutter would come in behind them with a new identity and access the schools through maintenance contracts. Cole sat in the dark clubhouse listening to the architecture of a horror that was larger and more organized and more patient than anything he had imagined, and he felt something inside him shift. Not break, not collapse, but recalibrate. The way a compass needle swings when you realize north isn't where you thought it was. This wasn't one man in one town. This was a system, a machine. And the Burdens weren't passive accomplices. They were components, moving parts, the infrastructure that made everything else possible. How many children? Cole asked. Adler didn't answer immediately. The silence was its own answer. Gerald Burden says he doesn't know exact numbers. That's either true or it's the lie he tells himself to sleep. We'll know more when we pull records from the other cities. She exhaled. But the shoes in the storage unit, the photographs. We're looking at multiple victims across multiple jurisdictions over multiple years. Cole closed his eyes. Mr. Maddox, I need one more thing from you. What? The girl's notebook, the original, the one from her foster home. She said she left it behind when she came to find you at the diner. If it's still in the Burden house, it's evidence. It's the spine of the entire case. Everything she documented, the surveillance notes, the schedules, the license plates, it corroborates what Gerald Burden is saying. Without it, his testimony is uncorroborated, and a halfway competent defense attorney will have him recanting by the arraignment. Cole thought about the Burden house. Primary residence, east side of Ridgemont. He thought about a composition notebook hidden inside a pillowcase on a bed in a room that had never been a home. He thought about a 14-year-old girl who had built a weapon out of paper and pencil lead, and the kind of patience that only comes from learning, at 11 years old, that watching is the only power you have. "I'll get it," Cole said. "That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to tell me where it is. I'll get a warrant." A warrant takes hours. The Burdens knew people in this town. Friends, neighbors, anyone could walk into that house and clear it out before your warrant comes through. "Mr. Maddox, 30 minutes. I'll have it for you in 30 minutes, and I'll walk it straight to you at the Birch Street scene. No detours, no side trips. Straight to you." Another pause. Longer. The sound of a woman weighing protocol against necessity, law against urgency, the system against the reality that systems move at the speed of paperwork and predators move at the speed of fear. 30 minutes, Adler said, and hung up. Cole stood up. His body protested, knees, back, the shoulder that had never fully healed after the second deployment, the ribs that ached in cold weather from a motorcycle accident 6 years ago that he'd ridden away from because riding away from things was what he did. He crossed the common room to where Elias was sitting at the bar with an untouched glass of water in front of him, staring at the wall of photographs behind the bar with the expression of a man looking at a mirror and not recognizing what he sees. "The notebook," Cole said. "Mara's original notebook. It's at the Burden house." Elias looked at him. "The system can get it. The system is slow. And right now, speed is the difference between a case that holds and a case that collapses." "Cole." Elias's voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man who has lived through the moment where the right thing and the legal thing diverge, and who knows, from experience, that choosing between them leaves scars either way. "If we enter that house, I enter that house, alone. I know what it looks like. I know the risk. And I know that if that notebook isn't in Adler's hands by sunrise, every child on that storage unit wall, but every pair of shoes, every photograph, every name Gerald Burden is giving up right now becomes a case that never gets tried because the evidence chain has a gap the size of a composition notebook." Elias stared at him. The water in his glass was perfectly still. The clubhouse was perfectly quiet. Somewhere upstairs, Mara was sleeping in a room with the light on, and somewhere 60 miles west, a man named Gerald Burden was dismantling his own life sentence by sentence, and somewhere in a county lockup, Dale Sutter was sitting in a cell that was not so different from the one Elias had watched him through for 9 months. And the distance between all of these places, the clubhouse, the motel, the cell, was measured not in miles, but in the decisions made by men who could have chosen differently and didn't. "I'm coming with you," Elias said. "No. I know the house. Mara described it. The bedroom, the pillowcase, the window that faces the backyard. I can find that notebook in the dark in 3 minutes. If you're inside that house and something goes wrong, everything has already gone wrong, Cole. Everything went wrong the day the system let Sutter walk free. Everything went wrong when the Burdens passed a background check. Everything went wrong when Dr. Weeks heard a 14-year-old girl ask for help and decided she was the problem." Elias stood up. The water in his glass trembled with the movement and went still again. "I'm not staying behind. Not on this." Cole looked at him. Saw the fire, saw the damage, saw the particular combination of fury and grief and determination that had kept Elias upright through 3 years of sobriety and 7 years of silence, and one night that had torn all of it open and left him standing in the wreckage with nothing to hold on to except the promise he had made to a girl lying in the mud under a porch. 3 minutes, Cole said. 3 minutes. They rode. 2 bikes. The streets were empty. Ridgemont at 4:30 in the morning was a town that didn't exist. No cars, no pedestrians, no lights except the sodium vapor street lamps that cast everything in a jaundiced yellow that made the world look sick. The engines were loud in the silence, offensively loud. the sound bouncing off storefronts and empty parking lots and coming back to them like an echo of something that had already happened. The Burden house was on Maple Court, a cul-de-sac. 4 houses, all similar. Ranch style, vinyl siding, attached garages. The architectural language of a middle-class aspiration that had been mass-produced until it meant nothing. The Burden house was the second from the end. Dark. Cars gone. The driveway was empty. The porch light was off. A welcome mat sat in front of the door with a faded pattern that might once have said something cheerful. Cole parked on the street. Elias beside him. They killed the engines. Silence. Back door, Elias said. She told me the sliding door in the kitchen sticks but doesn't lock properly. You lift and push. They moved through the side yard. The grass was wet. The fence was low, 3 feet, decorative, the kind of fence that marks territory without actually keeping anything out. The backyard was small and dark and smelled like wet leaves and the particular decay of a garden that nobody has tended in months. The sliding door. Elias lifted, pushed. It opened with a soft scrape of metal on metal that sounded, in the silence, like a scream. Inside. Kitchen. The smell of a house that has been left in a hurry. Dishes in the sink, a coffee maker with old ground still in the basket, the sour undertone of garbage that should have been taken out before whoever lived here decided that their life as they knew it was over, and loaded their car and drove 60 miles west to a motel where they would be found paying cash under a false name. Elias moved through the kitchen into the hallway. He knew the layout from Mara's description. She had drawn it for him at the clubhouse, casually, the way another child might draw a picture of their family's house for a school assignment, except that Mara's drawing included the location of every exit, every window that opened, and the exact distance from her bedroom to the nearest phone. Survival cartography. The map-making of a child who had learned that knowing the terrain was the difference between escape and entrapment. Her room was at the end of the hall. Small. A single bed with a thin comforter pulled hastily to one side, a dresser with the top drawer open, emptied of whatever belongings she had taken when she left for the diner. On the wall, nothing. No posters, no photographs. No evidence of a personality or a preference or a life being lived. The room of someone who had learned not to put down roots because roots could be torn up. The pillowcase. Elias pulled it from the pillow. Inside, pressed flat against the fabric, was a composition notebook. Black and white marble cover. The corners were worn soft from handling. The pages were thick with pencil marks and the indentations of a hand that pressed hard because pressing hard was the only way to make sure the marks stayed. Elias held it. The weight of it was nothing, a few ounces of paper and cardboard and graphite, but the weight of what it contained, 71 days of observation, documentation, evidence gathering by a child who had been failed by every institution and every adult and every system designed to protect her. That weight was enormous. That weight was the weight of a case that would span 4 cities in 6 years and an unknown number of victims and would require this notebook, this object, this artifact of one girl's refusal to be silent, to hold it all together. He tucked it inside his jacket, against his chest, where he could feel it against his heartbeat. Got it, he said. They moved back through the hallway, through the kitchen, toward the sliding door, and then Cole's hand came up. The fist, the signal. Stop. Headlights, coming up the cul-de-sac, moving slowly. The deliberate searching pace of a vehicle looking for something specific. They pressed against the kitchen wall. Through the sliding door's glass they watched. A sedan, dark-colored. Not a police car. No light bar. No markings. It pulled to a stop in front of the Burden house. The engine stayed running. The headlights stayed on. A figure got out. Walked to the front door. Tried the handle. Locked. Walked around the side of the house, the opposite side from where Cole and Elias had entered. Disappeared from view. Cole looked at Elias. Elias looked at the notebook inside his jacket. The figure reappeared at the backyard fence, stepped over it, moved toward the back door, toward the sliding door, toward them. In the thin light from the street lamp filtering through the yard, the figure's face became visible. Dr. Sandra Weeks. She was wearing a coat over what looked like pajamas. Her hair was uncombed. Her face was the face of a woman who had been woken by a phone call, and had driven here in a state of controlled panic to do something that could not wait until morning. She reached for the sliding door handle. Cole stepped into the doorway. Weeks saw him and stopped. The blood drained from her face so fast it was almost audible, a rushing sound, a vacuum, the physical manifestation of a woman watching her entire carefully constructed life collapse in real time. She took one step backward. Her mouth opened. "Looking for something?" Cole said. Weeks's eyes went from Cole to Elias, to the shape of the notebook visible beneath Elias's jacket. Her expression completed a journey that took less than 2 seconds, from surprise to recognition to calculation to the final, desperate understanding that she was too late. "That's private property," she said. Her voice was shaking. The authority she had wielded in her office, the smile, the folded hands, the threat of defamation, was gone. What remained was a woman standing in a backyard at 5 in the morning in her pajamas, trying to retrieve evidence that would connect her to a conspiracy that had spanned half a decade, and finding instead 2 men who had been inside her comfortable, complicit silence since the moment a girl placed a photograph on a table and said 5 words. "You knew," Elias said. Not a question, not an accusation, a statement of fact delivered with the flatness of a man who has passed through rage into something colder and more permanent. "You knew who he was. You knew what the Burdens were doing. And when we came to your office with a photograph and a name, you called them. You warned them, and they called Sutter, and Sutter took a boy." Weeks's mouth worked. No sound came out. Her hands hung at her sides, opening and closing, the reflexive grasping of a person who has reached for the last handhold and found it gone. "A boy named Lucas," Cole said, 8 years old. 53 pounds. He was sedated and carried into an empty house and laid on a bare mattress in the dark. And you made that possible. The sound that came out of Dr. Sandra Weeks was not a word. It was not a cry. It was the sound of a structure collapsing from the inside. A groan, a crack, the exhalation of something that had been held upright by tension alone and had just had the last cable cut. She sat down on the wet grass. Not fell. Sat. As if her legs had simply informed her that they were finished supporting her and she had no choice in the matter. Cole stepped past her. Elias followed. They walked through the yard, over the fence, down the side of the house, and into the street where their bikes waited. Cole pulled out his phone, dialed Adler. "We have the notebook, and you need to send a unit to the Burden residence on Maple Court. You'll find Dr. Sandra Weeks, principal of Ridgemont Middle School, sitting in the backyard. She came to destroy evidence. She didn't make it." He hung up before Adler could respond. They rode back to the clubhouse as the first gray light of dawn crept over the eastern edge of Ridgemont, like something reluctant, something that wasn't sure it wanted to illuminate what had happened here. The streets were still empty. The town was still sleeping. But beneath the surface, in the spaces between the houses and the schools and the offices and the courtrooms, something was shifting, cracking, coming apart. At the clubhouse, Cole set the notebook on the bar. He didn't open it. He stood there with both hands flat on the scarred wood surface and his head down and his eyes closed, and the weight of the last 18 hours pressing on his shoulders like a physical load. Elias sat beside him. Neither spoke. Then, from above, footsteps. Light. Bare feet on wood floor. Mara appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing the same clothes. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes carried the particular clarity of a person who has slept deeply for the first time in months, and woken into a world that is still broken but no longer hers alone to carry. She saw the notebook on the bar. She looked at Cole, at Elias, at the notebook. "You went back for it," she said. "It's yours," Elias said. "Every word, every line, every map. You built this." Mara came down the stairs. She crossed the room. She put her hand on the composition notebook, the black and white marble cover, the worn corners, the pages thick with 71 days of evidence. And she stood there with her palm flat on the cover and her eyes closed, and for the first time since she had walked into a roadside diner and placed a photograph in front of a stranger, Mara Holloway looked like what she was. A child, not a witness, not a case file, not a troubled foster kid with documented behavioral issues. A child who had carried something too heavy for too long and who was, in this moment, In this room, surrounded by men who had broken every rule and crossed every line and risked everything they had to stand where they were standing, finally setting it down. Outside, the first siren of the new day cut through the dawn air, then another, then a third. Ridgemont was waking up, and the town it woke into would never be the same as the town that had fallen asleep. The reckoning was here, and it was only just beginning. The reckoning came not in a single wave, but in a slow, grinding tide that pulled Ridgemont apart over the course of 11 days. Day 1 brought the arrests. Gerald and Patricia Burden, booked at the county jail 60 miles west, transported back to Ridgemont in separate vehicles because Gerald was still talking and Patricia had stopped, and the space between their silence and his confession was a chasm that would never close. Dr. Sandra Weeks was arrested in the backyard of the Burden house on Maple Court at 5:47 a.m., still sitting in the wet grass in her pajamas, her hands covered in mud, her face carrying the particular emptiness of a person who has watched the last wall of their constructed life fall and is now sitting in the rubble trying to remember who they were before they built it. Day 2 brought the media. Vans from 3 networks parked along the main street. Reporters stood in front of the school with microphones and practiced expressions of gravity, asking questions that the town didn't want to answer. How long? How many? Who knew? The questions were simple. The answers were not. The answers were buried in filing cabinets and foster care databases and school district HR records, and the carefully maintained silence of a community that had mistaken comfort for safety and was now learning, publicly, painfully, that the two were not the same. Day 3 brought the FBI. Sergeant Adler's case had grown beyond the jurisdiction of state police the moment Gerald Burden mentioned the 4th city. Federal agents arrived in dark sedans and set up in the community center and began the process of untangling a network that had operated across state lines for 6 years, a network built not on sophistication or technology, but on the simplest and most devastating weapon available, the willingness of ordinary people to look away. Elias watched all of it from a distance. He sat at the clubhouse bar each morning with coffee he didn't drink and watched the news on a television mounted above the pool table that usually only showed football games. He watched the reporters. He watched the officials. He watched the press conferences where men in suits used words like systemic failure and comprehensive review and accountability, words that meant nothing to the children whose photographs had been pinned to the wall of a storage unit on Mill Race Road, words that would never undo the weight of a boy who weighed 53 pounds and whose head had fallen against Elias's shoulder with the loose, terrible gravity of drugged sleep. On day 4, Elias drove to the county hospital, alone. He didn't tell Cole. He didn't tell anyone. He parked in the visitor lot and sat in his truck for 17 minutes before going inside. Because going inside meant seeing Lucas Devane, and seeing Lucas Devane meant confronting the fact that he, Elias Crow, former corrections officer, the man who had processed Dale Sutter and written his incident reports and watched him through reinforced glass for 9 months, had been 3 feet away from that cell every working day for the better part of a year, and it hadn't mattered. The system had still failed. The cage had still opened. The monster had still walked out and built a new name and found new schools and new children and new empty houses, and all of Elias's diligence, all of his reports, all of his sleepless nights in a corrections facility that smelled like bleach and fear had amounted to nothing. He went inside anyway. Lucas was in a pediatric room on the 3rd floor. He was awake. He was sitting up in bed with an IV in his arm and a stuffed bear that a nurse had brought from the gift shop and a coloring book that he was actually using this time, filling in the spaces with careful, deliberate strokes of color, staying inside the lines the way children do when they are trying to create order in a world that has stopped making sense. A social worker sat in a chair by the door. She looked at Elias with the polite suspicion of a person whose job requires her to evaluate every adult who comes near a vulnerable child, and Elias understood the suspicion and respected it and hated it in equal measure because it was a suspicion that should have been applied months ago by different people in different rooms. "I was there," Elias said. "At the house. I carried him out." The social worker studied him, made a decision, nodded once, stepped into the hallway to give them space but stayed within earshot, which was exactly right and exactly what should have been happening all along. Elias sat in the chair beside the bed. Lucas looked at him. The boy's eyes were clear now. The sedation had worn off completely, replaced by the hyper-alert watchfulness of a child who has learned in one terrible night that the world contains things he didn't know existed. He didn't speak. He held the crayon, green, the color of grass and safety, and things that grow, and he waited. "Hey, buddy," Elias said. His voice cracked on the second word, and he let it crack because the boy deserved honesty, and honesty sometimes sounds like breaking. "You don't know me, but I know you. And I came to tell you something that I need you to hear, even if you don't understand it right now." Lucas watched him. The crayon was still. "What happened to you was not your fault, not one part of it, not 1 second of it. You didn't do anything wrong and you didn't fail to do anything right, and the man who hurt you, he's in a place now where he can't reach you. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever." The boy's lip trembled, a single small movement, like the first crack in a dam. "And the people who were supposed to keep you safe and didn't, that's not your fault either. That's their failure, not yours. You hear me? Their failure." Lucas's hand moved, not toward Elias, toward the stuffed bear. He pulled it closer, held it against his chest. The crayon fell on the blanket. "You don't have to say anything," Elias said. "You don't have to do anything. You just have to know that you're not alone. And the next time someone tells you you're safe, it's going to be true." He didn't stay long. He didn't need to. The visit wasn't for healing. That would take years and professionals, and the kind of patient, specialized care that no biker with a scarred past and an unsteady voice could provide. The visit was for one thing only: to make sure that the first adult face Lucas remembered from the night he was carried out of the dark was a face that came back, that showed up, that sat in a plastic chair in a hospital room and said the things that should have been said before any of this ever started. Elias drove back to the clubhouse. He sat in the parking lot. He put his head on the steering wheel and he cried. Not the controlled, strategic release of a man managing his emotions, but the helpless, gasping sobs of someone who has been holding a weight for too long and has finally found a place to set it down. He cried for Lucas. He cried for Mara. He cried for the shoes in the storage unit and the photographs on the wall and the names he would never know. He cried for the version of himself that had walked the corridors of a state correctional facility, believing that the system worked, that the cages held, that the reports mattered. That version was dead, had been dead since a girl walked into a diner and showed him a photograph of a man who should have been locked in a cage 3 states away and was instead standing in a school hallway wearing a lanyard and a smile. When he was done, he wiped his face with the back of his hand. He got out of the truck. He went inside. Cole was waiting. Not intentionally. He was always at the bar in the morning, the way a captain is always on the bridge. But when Elias walked in, Cole looked at him and saw the red eyes and the wet cheeks and the particular stillness of a man who has just passed through something and come out lighter on the other side. And Cole didn't say anything. He poured a cup of coffee and set it in front of Elias and went back to his own, and they sat together in silence the way they had sat together 1,000 times before. And the silence was not empty. It was full of everything they had done and everything they hadn't said and everything that would happen next, and the simple, irreducible fact of 2 men who had walked through a door together and come out the other side together and would keep walking through doors together because that was what they did. That was who they were. On day 7, the charges were filed. Dale Sutter, his real name, finally, printed in black letters on official documents, was charged with 6 counts across 2 jurisdictions, with additional charges pending from federal investigators working the other cities. Gerald Burden was charged as an accomplice, his cooperation noted but insufficient to spare him from prosecution. Patricia Burden was charged separately, her silence interpreted by the legal system the same way it had been interpreted by the town, as complicity. Dr. Sandra Weeks was charged with obstruction of justice and failure to report, the legal language flat and clinical and entirely inadequate to describe what she had actually done, which was to hear a child ask for help and decide that the child was the problem. Mara followed the proceedings from the clubhouse. She was still there. Mercy Langford had arranged emergency placement with a family 2 counties over, but the paperwork was slow and the system that had failed Mara was now, in its grinding, institutional way, trying to make amends by processing her transfer with a thoroughness it had never applied to her safety. Mercy came every day. She brought books and snacks and clean clothes and sat with Mara and talked about things that had nothing to do with courts or evidence or storage units, college, careers, the difference between dogs and cats as pets, whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Normal things, small things, the things that rebuild a life not through grand gestures but through the accumulation of moments that are safe and mundane and blissfully ordinary. Mara was drawing again. Not surveillance maps, not escape routes, not the meticulous documentation of a predator's movements through institutional spaces. She was drawing other things now. A motorcycle, detailed and precise, every spoke and cable rendered with the technical accuracy of someone who had spent hours studying machines she found beautiful. A dragon curled around a tower, breathing fire that looked more like sunrise than destruction. A row of boots, 7 pairs, different sizes, lined up outside a door. Whistler saw the boots drawing and had to leave the room. On day 9, Tommy Raines drove Mara to a department store 30 miles outside Ridgemont because she needed clothes that were her own, not borrowed, not charity, not pulled from a donation bin at a shelter. He gave her $200, his own money, pulled from the coffee can he kept under his bathroom sink, and told her to spend it however she wanted, and he would wait in the truck. She came back an hour later with 3 pairs of jeans, 2 hoodies, a pack of socks, a sketchbook with heavy paper designed for charcoal and graphite, and a set of professional drawing pencils that cost more than everything else combined. She held the pencils the way another child might hold a trophy or a prize, like proof of something. In the truck on the way back, she was quiet for 20 minutes. Then she said, without looking at Tommy, "Thank you." "It's just clothes," Tommy said. "Not for the clothes." She looked out the window at the highway unspooling beneath a sky that was, for the first time in what felt like weeks, actually blue. "For not leaving when it got hard. In the diner. You could have left." Tommy drove. He watched the road. His hands were steady on the wheel. The same hands that still flinched at backfires. The same hands that had held a rifle in a country he tried not to remember. The same hands that had signed a form at a VA office requesting help he never received. Steady. For her. "We don't leave," he said. She nodded, looked out the window again. And something in the set of her shoulders, the way they dropped a quarter inch, the way the tension in them released like a breath held too long, told Tommy everything he needed to know about what those 3 words meant to a girl who had spent her entire life watching people leave. On day 11, Sergeant Adler called Cole. The conversation was brief. The case was transitioning to federal jurisdiction. The FBI would take point on the multi-state investigation. Mara's testimony, combined with her notebook and the evidence from the storage unit and Gerald Burden's cooperation, had provided the foundation for what Adler described, in her precise and unemotional way, as one of the most comprehensive predator network cases I've worked in 20 years. Sutter would not see the outside of a prison for the rest of his natural life. The Burdens would serve significant time. Dr. Weeks had resigned and been charged and would carry the weight of her choices through whatever remained of her career and reputation and ability to look at herself in a mirror. "The girl," Adler said at the end. "Mara, how is she?" "She's drawing dragons," Cole said. A pause. Then, for the first and only time in their interactions, Adler almost laughed. It came out as a short exhale through her nose, the ghost of amusement, the shadow of something human behind the professional architecture. "Good," she said. "That's good." 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning that was cold but clear, Mara left the clubhouse. Her new placement was with a woman named Dana Kowalski, a retired teacher who lived in a farmhouse on 12 acres in a county where the nearest school was small enough that the principal knew every student by name. Mercy had vetted Dana personally, not through a database check or a form submission, but through the kind of investigation that only a woman who had spent 20 years catching dropped children could conduct. Phone calls, home visits, conversations with neighbors, former colleagues, the mail carrier, the woman at the feed store where Dana bought grain for the 2 horses she kept in a paddock behind the house. Mercy left nothing to chance. She had learned, the same way Mara had learned, that chance was the enemy of safety. The morning Mara left, the entire club was there. Not because anyone had called a meeting or issued an order. They were just there. 7 men standing in the parking lot of a converted auto garage on an industrial stretch outside a town that was still tearing itself apart and rebuilding itself and trying to figure out what it was now that the silence had been broken. Big Phil had made breakfast: eggs, bacon, toast, coffee. He had set the table in the common room, the real table, the one they used for church, the scarred wooden surface where votes were taken and decisions were made and the future of the brotherhood was shaped. He had put out 7 plates for the members and one smaller plate at the head of the table where Cole usually sat. And when Mara came downstairs and saw the plate and the chair and the 7 men standing around the table waiting for her, she stopped on the last step and looked at them, and her face did something that none of them had seen it do before. She smiled. Not a big smile. Not the performative grin of a child posing for a photograph. A small, careful, tentative smile. The smile of someone testing the structural integrity of a feeling they haven't used in a long time, checking to see if it will hold their weight. It held. They ate together. Phil's eggs were perfect, as always. Dutch poured her coffee and added cream without asking because he had noticed over the past 2 weeks that she took her coffee light, and noticing was what Dutch did. Behind the sunglasses, behind the silence, behind the wall he had built between himself and everything he didn't want to see, there was a man who saw everything. Roach told a story about getting lost in West Virginia during a poker run 3 years ago that involved a wrong turn, a goat farm, and a county sheriff who turned out to be his ex-wife's cousin. The story was funnier than it should have been, and Mara laughed. An actual laugh, sharp and sudden and slightly hoarse from disuse, and the sound of it moved through the room like sunlight through a crack in a wall. After breakfast, Cole walked Mara outside. The morning was bright. Cold, but bright. The kind of cold that doesn't threaten. It clarifies. The sky was hard blue above the rooftops, and the air smelled like exhaust and frost and the faint, persistent sweetness of oil and leather that was the permanent signature of the Iron Revenant's clubhouse, a smell that Mara would carry in her memory for the rest of her life the way other people carry the smell of their childhood kitchen or their grandmother's perfume. "Mercy's meeting you at Dana's place," Cole said. "She'll stay the first few days, help you settle in." Mara nodded. She was wearing the new hoodie Tommy had bought her, and the professional drawing pencils were in the front pocket. She carried them everywhere now, the way another person might carry a phone or a wallet, her most valued possession, her tools. "The notebook," she said. "Will I get it back?" "When the case is over, it's evidence now, but it's yours. Every page." She looked at the row of motorcycles parked in front of the garage. 7 bikes. Chrome and steel, and the accumulated miles of men who rode not to escape but to move, to feel the road beneath them, to be reminded that the world was bigger than the small, dark rooms they carried inside their heads. "I used to think bikers were scary," she said. "We are scary," Cole said. She looked at him. He looked at her, and the thing that passed between them was not a joke and not a dismissal, and not the kind of easy reassurance that adults offer children when they want to smooth over something complicated. It was the truth. They were scary. They were loud and scarred and tattooed, and they rode machines that shook the ground, and they lived in a world that polite society kept at arm's length, and they had done things that would keep a therapist busy for decades. They were scary the way a thunderstorm is scary, not because it wants to hurt you, but because it carries a power that doesn't care about your comfort, that operates on a scale larger than your preferences, that exists to do something necessary and does it without apology. "You saved yourself," Cole said. "You know that. Every drawing, every note, every map. You built the case. You found the storage unit. You found the house on Birch. You found Lucas. All of that was you." "I couldn't have done it alone." "You did do it alone, for 71 days. You did it completely alone because every person who should have been standing with you decided it was easier to look away." He paused. "We just showed up." "You showed up," Mara said. And the way she said it, the weight she gave those 2 words, the gravity, the absolute unshakable significance, transformed them from a simple statement of fact into something larger. An acknowledgement, a testimony, a verdict on the difference between the adults who had failed her and the ones who hadn't. The teachers, the counselors, the foster parents, the principals, they had all been present in her life. Physically, there. occupationally responsible, but they had not shown up. Not in the way that mattered, not in the way that required risk and discomfort, and the willingness to walk into a room where you might find something that would change you forever. These men had shown up, and it had changed them. Every one of them. Mercy arrived at 10. She drove the same dented Honda Civic, the child's car seat still in the back, the box of granola bars refilled. She hugged Mara. Not the careful, professional embrace of a social worker maintaining boundaries, but the fierce, full-body hug of a woman who had been catching drop children for 20 years and had learned that boundaries were important, but sometimes a kid just needed to be held. Mara got in the car. She buckled her seatbelt. She rolled down the window. Elias was standing at the edge of the parking lot, apart from the others, the way he always stood, slightly removed, slightly watchful, the permanent posture of a man who had spent too many years observing from the margins to be fully comfortable at the center. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and his shoulders were hunched against the cold, and his face was the same face it had always been. Tired, lined, carrying the shadows of things he had seen and done and failed to prevent. But his eyes were different. Something in them had shifted over the past 2 weeks. Not healed. That was too simple, too clean, too much like the inspirational quote pins on Mrs. Pratt's lanyard. Not fixed, just redirected. The fury and the grief and the guilt were still there, would always be there, but they were pointing somewhere now. At something. Toward a purpose that had been given shape by a girl with a composition notebook and the kind of courage that shames the entire adult world into silence. Elias, Mara said. He looked up. You kept your promise. He didn't trust his voice. He nodded. Once. The Honda pulled away. The tires crunched on gravel. The brake lights flared at the end of the lot. Then the car turned onto the road and was gone, carrying a 14-year-old girl toward a farmhouse with 12 acres and 2 horses and a retired teacher who had been vetted by a woman who left nothing to chance. And for the first time in as long as any of the men standing in that parking lot could remember, the departure of a vulnerable person from their presence felt not like a loss, but like a completion. A circle closing. A thing done right. Nobody moved for a while. They stood in the cold, 7 men in leather cuts, the sunlight catching the chrome of their bikes and throwing small, bright shapes across the concrete. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence that comes after the storm has passed, and the damage has been assessed, and the work of rebuilding has not yet begun, but will begin, soon, because that is what storms demand. Not permanence, but response. Dutch put his sunglasses on, took them off, put them on again. The cycle of a man negotiating with his own armor, trying to decide how much of the world he was ready to see today. Tommy walked to his bike. He sat on it without starting the engine. He just sat there with his hands on the grips and his feet on the pavement and his face turned toward the direction the Honda had gone. And he stayed that way for 5 minutes, and nobody interrupted him because they all understood that sometimes a man needs to sit on his motorcycle and look at an empty road and feel the particular ache of having done something that mattered. Whistler lit a cigarette. His hands were steady. His missing fingers, the ones he'd left in Fallujah, along with a piece of himself that would never grow back, didn't bother him today. Some days they ached. Some days he could feel them, ghost sensations in the spaces where they used to be, reaching for tools and triggers and doorknobs that they would never touch again. Today they were quiet. Today the absence was not a wound but a marker, proof that he had been somewhere, done something, survived something, and was still here. Big Phil sat on the steps of the clubhouse and called his daughter. It went to voicemail. It always went to voicemail. He left a message. Hey, baby girl. It's Dad. I just wanted you to know I was thinking about you today. That's all. I'm thinking about you. He hung up. He looked at the phone. He put it in his pocket. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, the same hand that had made grilled cheese sandwiches for a girl he'd never met, because making food was the only language he had for the things he couldn't say. Roach was already inside, folding a map. Not a digital map. A paper map, the kind he kept in his saddlebag, the kind he navigated by because he didn't trust GPS, and didn't trust satellites, and didn't trust anything he couldn't hold in his hands and trace with his finger. He folded it along the creases and put it away, and pulled out another one, a clean one, unmarked, and spread it on the bar. New roads, new distances, new destinations, the world continuing. Cole was the last to come inside. He stood in the doorway and looked back at the parking lot one more time. The gravel, the oil stains, the ghosts of tire tracks where the Honda had been, the sky above, blue and cold and immense. Somewhere out there, in a federal building in a city he'd never visited, investigators were using Mara's notebook to build a case that would span 4 cities in 6 years and an unknown number of lives that had been damaged and would now, slowly, imperfectly, be seen. Somewhere out there, Lucas Devane was coloring inside the lines in a hospital bed, learning to surface from a darkness he should never have been pushed into. Somewhere out there, a retired teacher was preparing a room in a farmhouse for a girl who had never had a room that was truly hers. Cole came inside. He poured a cup of coffee. He sat at the bar next to Elias. "You good?" Cole asked. "No," Elias said. "Yeah, but better." Cole nodded. He drank his coffee. The clubhouse was quiet. The radiator ticked. The photographs on the wall, members past and present, some of them dead, all of them remembered, watched from their frames with the patient, permanent gaze of people who had once sat at this bar and drunk this coffee and carried their own damage through the same door, and found, in the company of other damaged men, something that wasn't healing but was close enough to keep them riding. Outside, the wind picked up. It carried the smell of cold air and distant highways, and the faint mechanical perfume of engines waiting to be started. The bikes sat in a row in the sunlight, chrome gleaming, mirrors reflecting a sky that went on forever. They would be ridden again, tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever the road called and the men answered, because that was the arrangement. Not a schedule, not an obligation, but a rhythm. The rhythm of men who had lost things and found things and lost things again, and who kept moving because movement was the only language that said everything they couldn't. 3 months later, on a Saturday in early spring, the Iron Revenants rode to a children's fundraiser at a community center 2 towns over. It was Mercy Langford's event, a charity drive for foster kids transitioning out of the system, the kind of event that runs on donated food and volunteer labor and the stubborn refusal of people like Mercy to accept that the world is too broken to fix. The bikers ran the grill. Phil made burgers. Roach organized a motorcycle display for the kids, letting them sit on the bikes, twist the throttle, feel the weight of a machine that was too big for them but wouldn't always be. Dutch ran the music from a Bluetooth speaker wired to his phone and played country and classic rock. And at one point, something by Fleetwood Mac that made Whistler stop what he was doing and stare into the middle distance with an expression that suggested a memory too specific and too painful and too beautiful to share. Mara came. She arrived with Dana Kowalski in a pickup truck that had more miles on it than most of the motorcycles. She was taller. Not much. An inch, maybe 2, but enough that the change was visible, the way a plant that has been moved from shade to sun shows its gratitude through growth. Her hair was different. Her clothes fit. She moved through the world with a looseness that had not been there before. Not the hypervigilant precision of a girl mapping exits, but the awkward, slightly clumsy openness of a teenager who was learning, for the first time, that not every room required an escape plan. She had a portfolio under her arm, drawings. She had been accepted into a summer art program at a community college near Dana's farm. And the portfolio was her application, 12 pieces, charcoal and graphite, including a series called Engines that depicted motorcycle parts with a technical precision and an emotional warmth that made them look less like machines and more like living things. The admissions committee had noted her unusual maturity of observation. They had no idea. She found Cole at the grill. She stood beside him and watched him flip burgers for a moment, and then she pulled something from her portfolio and handed it to him. A drawing. Framed. She had bought the frame herself with money earned from selling sketches at Dana's neighbor's farm stand. It was the photograph. The school photograph that had started everything. But Mara had redrawn it from memory, and in her version, the background figure, the man in the collared shirt with the lanyard, was not a person. He was an absence, a white space, an erasure. Where Dale Sutter had been, there was nothing, just paper, just blankness, Just the clean, unmarked surface of a page from which a threat had been permanently removed. And over that blankness, drawn with the fine red pencil from the professional set Tommy had bought her, a single mark. An X. Cole held the drawing. He looked at it. He looked at Mara. "You saved yourself," he said. "We just showed up." Mara shook her head, slowly. The smile was back and still small, still careful, still testing its own weight, but steadier now, more sure. "You showed up," she said. That was everything. She walked away to find Tommy, who was teaching a 6-year-old how to make engine sounds with his mouth by the motorcycle display. Cole watched her go. He held the drawing. The sun was warm on his face for the first time in months. The smell of charcoal and grilled meat and fresh grass filled the air, and behind it, beneath it, woven through everything like a thread through fabric, the distant sound of engines on a highway somewhere. Riders heading somewhere, coming from somewhere, moving through a world that was cold and broken and full of people who looked the other way, but also full of people who didn't. He set the drawing on the table beside the grill. He flipped a burger. He poured coffee from a thermos into a paper cup and drank it standing up in the sun. Somewhere behind him, Mara laughed. The sound carried across the grass and the parking lot and the road beyond, mixing with the engine noise and the wind and the music from Dutch's speaker, rising into a sky that was blue and wide and open in every direction, the kind of sky that doesn't promise anything but doesn't close any doors either. And that was enough. It was enough.